Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Kaiokengoku on Wattpad. Now let's start. On a hot summer day in the streets of Shinjuku, Japan, a young and handsome man was walking back from his office job. The bags under his eyes were a clear sign of his sleep deprivation. This man was 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗟𝗘, a 20-year-old office worker. Unlike many of his peers, who were investing in their futures or pursuing higher education, Travis had opted for a straightforward office job. Although work wasn't exactly a challenge for him, he found enjoyment in it, particularly because of the many attractive colleagues. His reputation was well known, having had relationships with several of them, including his boss's wife, showcasing his confidence and charisma. Travis had moved from Britain to Japan due to his father's job transfer. The relocation had been relatively smooth, given his young age and lack of deep attachments to friends back home. Learning a new language posed no significant challenge for him either, thanks to his adaptable mind. Despite achieving excellent grades throughout his schooling, Travis had no interest in further education. Instead, he was focused on earning money to indulge in his passion for anime. His spending habits included purchasing manga, though he often read them illegally, figurines, and various merchandise. His wardrobe was filled with hoodies adorned with anime characters, which he cherished deeply. From this, it was evident that Travis was a devoted fan with no intention of changing his ways. He also was a big fan of the DC universe. He had just finished all of Superman's comics and was ready to watch the new movie, thinking about how he had somehow avoided major spoilers for this long. When he reached the crosswalk, he crossed the street slowly with the other pedestrians, who seemed to be having a typical day. However, Travis noticed a young boy looking around anxiously. Due to his short stature, the boy couldn't see well in front of him. Travis thought dismissively that the boy would be fine as he continued across the road. The light turned red, signaling that no one could cross anymore. The boy was still in the middle of the street, searching for his mother. Coincidentally, a truck was barreling toward him, the driver having passed out from too much drinking and leaving his foot on the gas pedal. Travis heard a woman scream calling the boy's name. He looked back and saw the same boy, frozen in fear in the middle of the street. Without hesitation, Travis sprinted toward the child and pushed him out of the way. In an instant, his world seemed to shift into slow motion as he faced the oncoming truck hurtling toward him. In the bustling city of 𝗎𝗎, Japan, a world where heroes and villains clash almost every single day, the extraordinary has become ordinary. But it wasn't always like this. It all began in China when news broke of a miraculous 𝗬𝗓𝗏, a baby glowing with bioluminescence. That single event marked the dawn of a new era. Soon after, people all over the world began developing strange and powerful abilities, gifts that would later be known as quirks. Many years have passed since that first quirk appeared. Now, nearly 80% of the global population possesses some form of superpower. In response to this dramatic shift, a new profession was born: heroes. Trained, licensed, and adored by society, these individuals now stand as protectors of peace. On a quiet afternoon at a local kindergarten playground, a young boy with unruly green curls sat alone on a swing, his gaze distant as he stared up at the sky. The gentle creak of the swing chains echoed softly around him. Then, all at once, his vacant eyes sharpened. He blinked rapidly as he looked around in confusion. The sound of his own voice startled him, and instinctively, he grabbed his throat. He raised his small hands and froze, noticing they were tiny. Panic started to bubble up as he stumbled off the swing and rushed toward the nearest reflective surface, the silver slide. The moment he saw his reflection, his legs gave out. He thought bitterly about why he had become Izuku Midoriya, the main protagonist of My Hero Academia, one of the most iconic anime of the new generation. He had expected to end up as Superman or something similar, since that was the last thing he watched. He sighed, steadying himself as he stood up. All around him, other kids played without a care in the world. Ignoring them, Travis scanned the playground and made his way toward the school building, searching for a bathroom. Just as he reached the door, a young teacher approached him with a gentle smile, asking if he needed help. He politely declined and walked past her, feeling a bit more confident than usual. Travis locked the bathroom door behind him and stared into the mirror. For a brief moment, he wanted to cry, but he held it in. He thought about needing to get one for all, knowing he wouldn't receive that until he was 14. Then, without warning, a bright red and blue screen appeared before his eyes. His heart leapt with excitement. The screen welcomed him to the world of My Hero Academia, stating that his task was to become the greatest superhero to ever exist. To do so, he would need power, and the abilities of Superman would be granted to him gradually. He needed to embody heroic values to grow stronger. The initial assignment was laid out before him, consisting of daily exercise, outrunning his classmates, saving a cat from a tree, and treating others kindly, even his enemies. Travis felt relieved, thinking that the tasks were actually doable. The screen vanished, and he looked at himself in the mirror again, this time smiling. This was the beginning of something incredible. He could feel it in his bones. Power. Purpose. And maybe most importantly, he thought about the women in this world with a sly grin. "Mirko, wait for me, darling." Izuku walked out of the bathroom with a smile on his face. He was eager to tackle everything on his list, and he wanted to do it soon. The very thought of remaining weak gnawed at his chest like a parasite. He looked around at the children playing in the hallway of the preschool, some laughing as they chased each other, while others cried over spilled toys or unfair games. A smirk tugged at his lips as he thought about how unaware they were of the world around them. Returning to the small classroom, Izuku sat at his low desk and pulled out a battered green notebook labeled Hero Analysis #, flipping through a few pages filled with sketches and notes about heroes, combat styles, and quirks. He realized that while this information had once consumed hours of his time, it was no longer what he needed. He thought about writing down everything he needed to know about the future and how to invest early to be at least as wealthy as Momo. He had no intention of relying on grant money. He reached into his tiny backpack and pulled out a pencil, jotting down fragments of what he could remember: emerging tech companies, early quirk support gear manufacturers, and certain incidents that would become major turning points in hero society. At that moment, Izuku was just 4 years old, with small limbs and a squeaky voice, yet his mind held memories far beyond his age. He hadn't had his quirk evaluated yet, but he knew it would happen in about 3 months. He wondered if he would become Kryptonian or simply gain Superman's powers. Suddenly, a calm, unfamiliar voice echoed in his mind, smooth yet heavy like thunder wrapped in velvet. It informed him that he would become Kryptonian and warned him that no human could survive gaining those powers. The voice advised him to go somewhere far when he received even a fraction of that power to avoid the pain that would come with it. His eyes widened slightly as the classroom around him faded into the background. The words sank into his chest like a cold stone into water. He thought about the pain ahead, but for once in his life, he wasn't afraid. He was preparing for greatness, even if it meant enduring hardship first. He continued scribbling in his notebook, documenting every major event he could recall from the next few years: USJ, Kamino, the rise of the League, Nightie's death, and the shifts in public safety, with grim clarity. He noted every agency that rose to prominence, every hero worth investing in, and every piece of information that could give him a head start. After filling in the last bullet point, he closed the notebook with a small sigh of satisfaction and placed it neatly into his school bag. However, his mind wandered to the persona he would need to maintain when he got home. A few hours later, school was out. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. His mother, Izuku Midoriya, stood waiting at the gate with her usual warm smile. They walked hand in hand through the neighborhood, her presence comforting and familiar. She asked how school had been, and he replied that it was nice and that he had a lot of fun with Kaken and the others. Izuku noticed he looked happier than usual and asked if something good had happened, even wondering if he had finally gotten his quirk. Izuku thought about how perceptive she was and assured her that he would tell her if he did. He believed he was just a late bloomer and that his quirk would develop in a few months. Izuku expressed hope that he would get it soon, reminding him of his checkup in 3 months. She had booked the date for December, thinking he might just need a little more time. Izuku reassured her that he would start exercising to be stronger by the time his quirk showed up, and 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 smiled, touched by his determination. As they reached home, the sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the yard. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 went straight into the kitchen to start dinner, humming a tune as she chopped vegetables. Izuku wasted no time and stepped into the backyard, still in his school uniform. He rolled up his sleeves and began working out, but push-ups proved harder than expected. Frustrated, he collapsed onto the grass, thinking about how he needed to make weight somehow. Staring at the cloudless sky, an idea sparked in his mind. He remembered the beach, a place filled with all kinds of junk. He could find scrap metal, tires, or even old gym equipment if he was lucky. If not, he would make his own. With his goal set, Izuku stood up and ran back inside. He made a beeline for the bathroom, stepping into the warm water of the bathtub. As the steam began to rise, he looked down at his tiny, undeveloped body and sighed, missing his old self. A voice echoed inside his mind again, smooth and cryptic, suggesting that he could get back what he missed if he completed the assignment in 2 weeks. Determination flickered behind his eyes like a lit match ready to ignite. The next day, Izuku woke up feeling unusually refreshed. Sunlight peeked through the curtains of his bedroom, casting a golden hue over the All Might poster above his bed. For the first time in a while, he didn't feel groggy or half asleep. His body still ached from yesterday's attempt at working out, but it was a good kind of ache, the kind that meant he was doing something right. He hopped out of bed, walked to the bathroom, and took a warm bath on his own. Afterward, he dried himself, brushed his teeth, and got dressed without a word. That's when his door creaked open behind him. 𝐻𝐿𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. Her son was not only awake before her but was already dressed. His green shirt was neatly tucked into a pair of tiny jeans, and he was combing his damp hair in front of the mirror. 𝐻𝐿𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 asked slowly, narrowing her eyes if he had woken up earlier than her, bathed himself, and got dressed. She wondered if someone had swapped him or if he was a clone. Izuku turned to her with a soft smile, explaining that he just didn't want to burden her anymore. That answer, paired with the honest look in his eyes, melted her doubt instantly. Her hand came up to her chest as her expression softened. She expressed her concern, saying she didn't want him to grow up too fast, and playfully asked him to save their bath time tradition. He agreed, not wanting to break her heart just yet, and turned back to the mirror to study himself. His mop of green hair was still unruly, and his outfit was plain but clean. He thought to himself that while he had no style, he at least looked presentable. As he made his way downstairs, he was caught off guard by a sudden flash. 𝐻𝐿𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 had her phone out, camera pointed at him, a wide smile on her face, saying she would save this one for when he was all grown up before walking toward the kitchen. Izuku blinked, then snorted to himself, realizing that Bitcoin had already been created. He noted that everything in this world besides the quirk system was the same as his own, meaning he should invest. He sat down to eat the breakfast his mom had prepared, steamed rice, grilled fish, and a single egg, just how he liked it. Unfortunately, there was one small issue with his brilliant financial plan. He was broke and didn't even have a bank account. Being a kid felt frustrating to him as he stuffed his mouth with rice. After eating, he put on his little shoes, waved goodbye, and told his mom he would be coming home alone. As he walked the familiar streets of 𝐒𝐮𝐴, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, he continued strategizing. He calculated that Bitcoin wouldn't really boom until 2013, giving him about 3 years. He would be 7 by then, and he thought maybe 𝐻𝐿𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 could open a kid's savings account for him. She was super trusting, and if he made it seem like it was for a future education fund, she would probably help. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Halfway to school, he spotted a familiar figure up ahead. Bakugo Katsuki, Kaken, was strutting toward him, hands jammed into his pockets and flanked by his 2 usual lackeys. All 3 of them wore smug expressions. Bakugo called out to him, asking where he had been the previous day when they were exploring the creek. Izuku didn't even slow down. He walked past them without a second glance, stating that he went home like everyone else. The two goons froze in place, surprised that he had ignored them. Bakugo stared at Izuku's small back as he walked further away, his jaw clenched tightly. Izuku arrived in class just as the morning bell rang. The classroom buzzed with childish chatter and laughter as kids ran to their seats. But unlike the Izuku of yesterday, or the Izuku they all thought they knew, he didn't join in on the noise. He simply walked to his desk, pulled out a pencil, and sat in silence. There were no desperate attempts to please the teacher, no awkward stuttering when someone asked him about quirks, and certainly no goofy smiles aimed at Bakugo. He just existed, calm and detached. He thought to himself that he was an adult in a kid's body and questioned why he would want to entertain anyone in this daycare circus. Later, during break, most of the kids rushed outside, yelling as they scattered across the playground. Izuku, however, crawled into the shadowy space beneath the jungle gym, resting with his knees tucked and his back against one of the metal bars. The dim shelter gave him time to think, and more importantly, plot. He needed to be sneaky about his afternoon excursion, not wanting to attract any unnecessary attention. He began organizing a mental list of when to slip out, what routes to take, and what to bring. He could feel the excitement building in his chest and was actually looking forward to this. Suddenly, a pair of feet landed heavily in front of him. He looked up, and of course, it was Bakugo, crouched at the entrance of the jungle gym, his usual explosive energy wrapped in a scowl and a smirk. Bakugo confronted him, irritated that Izuku had ignored him. Izuku raised a brow, unimpressed, and casually responded that he was in a hurry. Bakugo's eyes twitched, expecting fear or flinching, but Izuku sat there like he didn't care. Bakugo huffed, clicking his tongue, and then suddenly switched moods, declaring that they should play tag and that Izuku was it. Izuku didn't move, stating he wasn't feeling like playing today. Bakugo stared at him, confused by his calm demeanor. For a moment, Bakugo didn't speak. He looked down at Izuku, who lay there confidently, like a cool older brother lounging on a rooftop. It bugged him, but he couldn't deny that Izuku looked cool. Bakugo turned on his heel and walked away without another word. Izuku kept watching the clouds through the metal bars above him, thinking that this assignment better be worth it. Somewhere nearby, Bakugo stopped and glanced back briefly, confused and just a little irritated by the shift. After school, Izuku wasted no time. The moment the bell rang, he bolted out of the classroom, offering a half-hearted wave to the teacher while ignoring the curious looks from his classmates. His small legs moved with purpose as he sped down the familiar route that curved toward Mizufu's forgotten corner, the trash beach. A few minutes later, he stood at its edge. The sea breeze carried the stench of rust and decay, and the waves lazily lapped against piles of discarded metal, plastic barrels, shattered appliances, and rotten furniture. It was a graveyard of civilization's leftovers, and to Izuku, it was perfect. He stepped forward, scanning the mess with sharp, calculating eyes. He thought about what he could bring back home, considering dumbbells and a hand grip if he was lucky. He would have to train here in secret. Izuku weaved through the trash, lifting bent pipes and kicking aside torn tarps. For the first few minutes, it was disappointing: empty water bottles, broken chair legs, rusted pans. But then, he found treasure. First, an intact pull-up bar welded into a fallen support beam. Then, an old stationary bike only slightly bent on one side. Not far from it, he unearthed a crate with 3 adjustable dumbbells, some weight plates still attached. Nearby lay a dusty sit-up bench, its cushion half-torn but usable. It was as if fate had dropped an entire home gym into the sand, just waiting for someone to claim it. He felt a grin tugging at the corners of his lips as he thought about his luck. With newfound energy, he began building. He propped up old broken refrigerators to act as walls, stacking them in a square shape to block out the wind and give him privacy. He dragged a rusted, detached door over and leaned it at the front like a makeshift entrance. It took sweat, time, and all the strength his small frame could muster, but eventually he stood back and stared at his creation with pride. His secret gym. He felt confident that he would be ripped before he knew it, wiping dirt off his cheek with the back of his sleeve. Satisfied, he dusted himself off and jogged home just before sunset. Once there, he changed, told his mom he was going out to play, and grabbed a water bottle before heading right back. And then the real grind began. Under the fading light of the setting sun, Izuku started his workout drill. Pull-ups first, but he could barely manage two. Then squats, push-ups, sit-ups, even an attempt at running laps around his makeshift walls. His body protested. His arms burned. His legs trembled with each rep, sweat drenched his shirt, and his breathing grew ragged. But he didn't stop. Not once. Hours passed until, at last, he collapsed onto the sand-covered ground, gasping for air. The cold wind hit his face, cooling his skin, and all he could do was lay there, utterly exhausted, but smiling. He thought about how this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long. His body was weak. But he had knowledge, motivation, and now a training ground. And that was more than enough. After that intense workout, Izuku dragged his aching body home, his shirt soaked through and clinging to his skin, each step heavier than the last. His muscles throbbed, and it felt like gravity itself had doubled just for him. When he finally slipped through the front door, he was quiet as a shadow. The house was dim and quiet, only the distant hum of a TV murmuring in the background. He crept through the hallway, careful not to alert anyone, and made it into the bathroom. The second his body hit the steaming bathwater, he felt like he had been reborn. The tension in his shoulders melted. The pain in his calves dulled. Even his thoughts slowed, lost in the haze of heat and exhaustion. A breathy laugh escaped him, soft and bitter. He thought about how he would not be moving much the next day, slumping back into the tub, the world outside slipping away. Then the door opened with a quiet creak. He barely turned his head before she stepped in. Inko stood in the doorway like she owned the room, a towel draped casually over one arm, her other hand resting on her hip. The light from the hallway spilled over her, outlining every curve. Her hair was tied back, loose strands framing her sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes, smoky, amused, a little dangerous, that truly caught him off guard. She mentioned how he had promised they would save bath time together, her voice smooth with a teasing pout. Izuku chuckled weakly, admitting he had kind of forgotten. Inko smiled knowingly and told him to move up. Without hesitation, she stepped into the tub gracefully, water rising around her as she lowered herself behind him. Without a word, she pulled Izuku back until his head rested against her chest. He felt the warmth envelop him, cradling him like a soft cushion. His breath caught for a second, more from the heat than the bathwater. As her arms lightly wrapped around his chest, he closed his eyes and let out a satisfied groan, feeling content. The next day, Izuku made his way to school as usual, his backpack bouncing lightly against his back. The morning sun bathed the streets of 𝐴𝐵 in gold, but his focus was already ahead, on progress, on training, on the list of objectives that would shape his future. And once again, just like the day before, he saw them. Up ahead, huddled around a large tree, were Bakugo and his gang. The three of them were snickering, faces twisted with amusement as they hurled stones upward at something trapped in the branches. Izuku squinted. A soft, terrified mew echoed through the air. Up in the tree, clinging for dear life to a narrow branch, was a small orange kitten. Its fur bristled, tail puffed out, and eyes wide with fear. He wondered what they were doing, already feeling his blood simmer. Bakugo laughed loudly as one of the rocks narrowly missed the kitten. His two lackeys chimed in, enjoying the chaos like it was some playground sport. Izuku saw this as his chance. He stepped forward, his expression calm but sharp. He told them it wasn't cool. His voice flat and disappointed, standing just a few steps behind them. They turned toward him, their amusement fading into mild surprise. Bakugo narrowed his eyes. Izuku didn't stop to explain. He walked straight past them, placed his bag down, and began climbing the tree without hesitation. His small hands gripped the rough bark, and despite his weak body, he moved quickly. Within seconds, he reached the kitten, gently grabbing it by the scruff as it whimpered softly. Then, without fear, he leapt down, landing clumsily but keeping the kitten safe in his arms. He looked up at Bakugo, his eyes calm yet filled with quiet disappointment. Izuku expressed his feelings, shaking his head slightly, conveying a sense of sadness rather than anger. He turned and walked away, cradling the kitten as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Bakugo stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, not from anger but from a confusing tightness in his chest. He looked up again to see Izuku kneeling by a nearby bush, where the kitten's mother, a larger calico, was waiting nervously. He placed the kitten down gently, and the two cats nuzzled each other with relieved purrs. A soft smile spread across Izuku's face. Bakugo stared, feeling a flicker of something inside him at that smile, a reflection of doing something good for others. Izuku stood tall, watching the cats for a moment longer before turning around. In his mind, a notification chimed, unseen by all but him. One of the invisible tasks on his mental checklist had just completed. He felt a surge of triumph, his heart beating faster. This wasn't just about strength, it was about character. For one straight week, Izuku worked out with relentless focus, pushing his small body to its limits. Every muscle ache, every cramp, and every drop of sweat reminded him of what was at stake. Day by day, his movements became more refined, his endurance grew stronger, and his posture more confident. At school, his classmates noticed the change, especially during physical education, where he easily outran all of them in a foot race. He had also become more helpful around the house, surprising Inko with how mature and dependable he had suddenly become. Whether it was taking out the trash without being told or sweeping the house, Izuku did it all without complaint. Now, it was Saturday morning. The sun peeked in through the bedroom window, casting light onto the wall opposite his bed. Izuku sat up, shirtless and a little sore, his eyes locking onto the board hanging above his desk. There it was, his assignment board, every box ticked, every task scratched off with fierce determination. He felt proud, wiping a bit of sweat off his brow. Suddenly, a soft mechanical ding echoed in his head, followed by a notification that shimmered in front of his eyes like a digital hologram. The notification revealed that he would become Kryptonian and receive a fraction of Superman's powers. His body would begin the Kryptonian conversion process, adapting to Earth's yellow sun and increasing his power over time. It warned him that the transformation process would be painful and advised him to initiate at his own risk. Izuku's eyes widened as he sat frozen in place, a strange warmth building up inside his chest, like fire flickering behind his ribs. He realized it was really happening. After taking a deep breath, he mentally selected to begin the transformation process. The moment he did, an intense burning sensation surged through his entire body, feeling as though lightning had struck every cell at once. He clenched his teeth and fell to the ground, trembling. The sensation was overwhelming, but even through the pain, he smiled, reminding himself that no pain meant no gain. This was what it took to be strong. 3 excruciating hours later, the pain disappeared as if it had never been there at all. Izuku lay on the floor, breathing and blinking at the ceiling. Slowly, he sat up, glancing down at his trembling hands. He stood, stretched, and looked around. His body felt lighter and stronger, though he appeared the same on the outside. He thought it was strange. He pondered how to grow stronger, realizing he had only received a small fraction of Superman's power. The response indicated that he would need to complete many missions before reaching a more significant percentage. He was informed that reaching full potential would mean being on par with a fully matured Superman. He accepted this as long as he could eventually fly and shoot lasers. 3 months later, Izuku and Inko visited the quirk registration center. Surprisingly, the doctor confirmed he had developed a quirk, but they couldn't determine what it was. There were no physical signs or indicators. They politely asked him to return once he discovered more. As they walked out, Izuku thought to himself that he wouldn't be returning. Later that day, he stood outside his house, the midday sun shining down on him. As the rays hit his skin, he suddenly felt something awaken within him. A warm, powerful pulse surged through his chest, spreading outward, and he grinned, thinking he should go to the beach. Just as he was about to cross the road, an assignment board flickered into existence right in front of him, glowing faintly with a golden hue. The sudden appearance startled him. The board shimmered as glowing text appeared in front of him, presenting an assignment to save a little girl from being hit by a car. The reward was an increase in power and beginner proficiency in hand-to-hand combat. Izuku's eyes widened as he instinctively turned his head to see a small girl had broken away from her mother, chasing a bouncing ball into the road. A car was speeding down the lane, the driver unaware, and the child oblivious. Her mother's scream pierced the air, full of raw panic. Izuku realized this assignment was actually useful, unlike the previous rewards he had received. He didn't have time to dwell on it, as the sound of squealing tires and the girl's scream grew louder. Without thinking, he pulled up his hoodie and muttered under his breath that it was hero time. He paused, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over him as he crouched low. Then he was off. In a blur of motion that felt both natural and unreal, Izuku dashed forward. His body felt lighter than ever before, and the world around him seemed to slow just enough for him to reach the girl with perfect timing. He swept her up in his arms, pivoted on his heel, and jumped out of the road just as the car screeched past them, missing them by mere inches. He landed smoothly, one knee bent, the girl held tightly against his chest. Her wide eyes stared up at him in silent awe. He asked if she was okay, his voice calm despite the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. The girl looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, her round cheeks and short brown hair making him smile behind his hoodie. It was Uraraka. She gave a small nod, lips trembling as tears began to spill down her cheeks. Suddenly, the assignment board appeared in front of his eyes, glowing brightly, indicating that the mission was complete and he had gained power and unlocked hand-to-hand combat skills. He gently placed Uraraka back on the ground just as her frantic mother came sprinting over, scooping her up in a tight embrace. Without waiting for thanks or recognition, Izuku turned away and stepped into the crowd. Before anyone could catch a good look at him, he vanished down a narrow alleyway, his hoodie drawn low over his face. He thought to himself that this feeling was not bad at all. Izuku walked along the quiet beach, waves crashing gently against the shore as the early morning breeze brushed through his hoodie. He glanced around to ensure no one was nearby before focusing his thoughts. He summoned the Superman suit. A flash of light burst before him, and the iconic red and blue outfit appeared, floating in the air, though it was triple his current size. He thought it was cool but decided to tweak it a bit. He focused on the colors, wishing for it to be green with a glowing S on the chest. Instantly, the suit shimmered and shifted, the reds turning into deep forest green, and this emblem pulsed faintly with radiant emerald light. After making a few more adjustments to the boots, gloves, and cape, it finally matched his taste. He crossed his arms proudly but then frowned, wondering how he was supposed to wear something so large. Before he could finish the thought, the suit suddenly dissolved into particles of glowing energy and surged into his body. His eyes widened as he felt the suit wrap around him from the inside out, materializing perfectly onto his skin like a second layer. He looked down in awe. It fit him perfectly. He thought it was amazing and noted that it was his size now, even if he still felt small. He flexed his arm with a grin and expressed excitement about getting into you. 10 years later, Izuku had changed. He had grown taller, much taller than anyone had expected, even to the amazement of his own mother, who often looked up at him with a stunned expression. His once slightly awkward features had matured into a striking jawline and eyes that carried a calm yet magnetic intensity. To say he was handsome would be an understatement. He was dangerously good-looking. So much so that nearly every girl in class had fallen for him hard. Right now, Izuku was slouched at the back of the classroom, one arm resting lazily on the desk as he stared out the window. The sunlight hit his face just right, casting a golden glow over his already perfect features. His emerald hair was slightly tousled, giving him an effortlessly cool look that only made things worse for everyone else. Meanwhile, the rest of the class was in chaos, particularly the girls. All eyes were on him. Every single girl had turned in her seat, cheeks flushed and eyes sparkling. Hearts practically floated around their heads. The teacher, clearly aware of the atmosphere, playfully asked the class to spell handsome. Without missing a beat, the girls responded in perfect, love-struck unison, spelling out his name. Izuku slowly turned his head to look at them, his face deadpan and expression blank. The girls swooned, hands to their cheeks, some nearly falling out of their chairs. A collective sigh of dreamy adoration filled the air. The boys, meanwhile, sat in silence, gritting their teeth and clenching their fists. One guy snapped his pencil, while another muttered darkly under his breath, glaring daggers at the living embodiment of every romantic rival they had ever imagined. Izuku thought to himself that the girls were acting strangely as he blinked slowly and turned back to the window, tuning out the chaos behind him. Class had finally ended. With his bag slung lazily over his shoulder, Izuku walked out of the classroom, ignoring the dreamy stares still being thrown his way by half the girls behind him. His tall frame drew attention whether he wanted it or not, but he didn't care. His mind was elsewhere. It had been 10 years and things had been going great. A small, satisfied smile touched his lips. In the last decade, Izuku had done more saving than half the professional hero agencies combined, excluding All Might, of course. No one could top him. But still, the numbers didn't lie. He had become the talk of Japan, hailed on social media and whispered about in alleyways. They called him the hoodie hero, a ghost in the streets, a savior in the shadows. Always wearing a plain black hoodie, no flashy costume, no media presence. Just results. To the average citizen, he was a miracle. To the Hero Commission, he was a nuisance, a vigilante who operated outside the system, stepping on toes and snatching headlines from licensed heroes just trying to make a living. But to Izuku, he was just doing what needed to be done. In 10 years, he had saved over 500 people, thwarted 100 robberies, resolved 150 hostage situations, and prevented 250 suicide attempts. The rest were just your average drag-enhanced villains and street-level chaos. He sighed as he walked through the school gates, wondering what Japan's problem with suicide was and thinking they needed to fix that. By the time he reached his neighborhood, the scenery had changed dramatically. Gone were the clustered apartment blocks and narrow alleys. Now he walked through a serene, high-end residential area, lined with trimmed hedges, luxury cars, and modern mansions that exuded wealth. He stopped in front of the second-largest house on the block, its sleek design mixing glass and stone, with her appealing matte black sports car parked in the driveway. He opened the door and stepped inside, grinning to himself. He loved his house, kicking off his shoes and heading down the polished stairs. Izuku was set for life. Thanks to his knowledge of the future, he had invested in all the right places: stocks, tech startups, cryptocurrency, and real estate. Every risk was a guarantee to him, and with every boom, his bank account grew significantly. Now, he was practically a teenage tycoon, though only his mother truly knew the extent of his success. He made his way down into the home gym, where the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sound of sneakers echoed in the room. Inko was on the treadmill, sweat glistening on her forehead, laser-focused on the screen in front of her. Izuku casually announced his return, and she smiled, slowing the machine before hopping off to grab a towel. She asked about his day, and he replied that school was as boring as usual, mentioning he would study since he had nothing better to do. Inko encouraged him to have fun, adding that she was determined to beat a rival in her workout. Izuku chuckled softly, shaking his head as he turned to go upstairs. In his room, he tossed his bag onto his gaming chair and removed his uniform shirt, revealing the toned muscles developed from years of training. With a relaxed breath, he began to float, rising off the floor with ease. He savored the familiar hum of power coursing through his body, feeling exhilarated. After hovering for a few seconds, he dropped onto his bed, the mattress creaking softly beneath him. With his hands behind his head, he stared at the ceiling, anticipating the real fun that awaited him later. As night fell, Travis heard a loud scream followed by shouts from a man on the verge of jumping. He rose from his bed and opened his closet, contemplating his black superhero suit but deciding it was too early for a debut, especially since he hadn't even applied to UA yet. Instead, he settled for his casual outfit and opened the door to his balcony, leaping into the night sky. In the heart of Mustafa, a sprawling metropolis where towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over neon-lit streets, the city lights shone brightly like stars brought down to earth. The air pulsed with the rhythm of city life, honking cars, muffled chatter, and the occasional call of street vendors. Some people were just getting off work, while others embraced the night, laughing and dancing beneath the artificial glow. High above the noise and color, a man stood on the narrow edge of A tall commercial building, his knees trembling slightly as the wind tousled his messy black hair. His wide, bloodshot eyes scanned the world below, filled with a sense of despair. He felt trapped, his heart pounding as he struggled to breathe. Clenching his fists, he felt the pressure building within him. Below, a few pedestrians glanced up and froze, gasps spreading through the crowd as a woman screamed. Phones were whipped out to record the scene or to call for help. Within minutes, sirens blared through the night as police cars screeched to a halt, lights flashing like warning beacons. The fire department followed, their ladder truck positioning itself in a desperate attempt to help. A policeman stepped forward, using a megaphone to call out to the man on the ledge, urging him to step away and reassuring him that he was not alone. But the man's thoughts were consumed by a painful memory of betrayal, leaving him feeling utterly alone. Tears streamed down his face as he grappled with his emotions, feeling like he had lost everything. With a heavy heart, he shouted out in anger, expressing his feelings of abandonment. The crowd below murmured in horror, some shouting for him to step back, but he was lost in his own despair, staring at the city lights that once felt magical but now seemed cold and distant. As the wind blew one last time, he smiled, not in peace but in surrender. He let go, plummeting through the air. Just then, a sudden black flash streaked across the night like lightning. In an instant, the falling man was snatched midair, his descent slowing sharply as a strong arm wrapped around him. He landed hard against the asphalt, legs buckling slightly under the shock of survival. Confused, he fell to his knees, staring at his trembling hands before looking up. Behind him stood a figure clad in a dark outfit, sharp eyes kind yet unwavering, locking onto him. The hero urged him not to take his life, stating there was more to life than he realized. The man, still breathing heavily, asked who he was. The figure chuckled softly, offering a relaxed smile and promising that he would find out soon. With that, the mysterious savior began to lift off the ground, a low rumble building in the air as he launched into the night sky, leaving behind a powerful gust of wind that swept across the crowd. The onlookers gasped, some shielding their faces from the blast, others frozen in awe as the strange new hero vanished into the night, leaving only silence, wind, and a glimmer of hope. Izuku sat perched on the edge of a tall building, legs dangling over the ledge as the soft breeze tugged at his cape. The city of Mustafa sprawled below him, lights twinkling, cars weaving through traffic, life buzzing in its usual rhythm. He stared down with a calm expression, taking a deep breath as he scanned the city for danger. One save down tonight, and it felt good. He thought about how solid his first save had been, feeling a bit like a brooding hero on a rooftop. He glanced at the reflection of his red and blue suit in the glass beside him, contemplating the colors. He decided he wanted to keep Superman's colors. They felt right. Plus, he imagined how he would look in green, like a bean, and smirked to himself. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a call from his mother. He sighed, stood up, and with a soft hum of energy, took off, disappearing into the night sky like a streak of wind. Within minutes, he was home. After a quick outfit change, he was back to plain old Izuku, now seated across the dinner table from his mother. Inko asked if he would go to next year, placing a dish in front of him. He replied eagerly, shoveling in food like he hadn't eaten in days. She mentioned they had never gone back to the hospital to re-register his quirk, noting how amazed they would be at the powers he had developed. He shrugged, expressing his longing to keep things low-key, unlike most heroes who were eager to flaunt their identities. Inko hesitated but respected his decision, turning on the TV. The reporter's voice cut through the room, announcing breaking news about the mysterious hoodie hero who had saved a young boy from a dire situation. Eyewitnesses speculated that the hero was just a boy, based on his voice and size. The question remained, who was this masked savior? Would he join the vigilantes or become a pro-hero? Inko blinked, lowering her chopsticks slowly, expressing her admiration for the brave boy. She turned to Izuku, who was now eating even faster, trying to avoid the conversation. She reminded him that she had told him to stop with the hero stuff until he was older. He protested, explaining that he had saved a life and that no one else had super hearing like him. He could hear a scream through a thunderstorm from 10 blocks away. 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 sighed, torn between admiration and worry. She understood but reminded him that he was still a teenager. What if he encountered someone dangerous? The thought made her anxious. Izuku assured her he would be fine, confident in his abilities. He stood up slowly, cape flicking behind him as he raised his chin with a grin, ready to declare himself a hero. Just then, the TV announcer shouted the title of an old superhero documentary, interrupting his moment. Both paused, and then 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 burst out laughing. Izuku groaned and sat back down, hiding his face behind a bowl. After dinner, Izuku went upstairs, yawning as he loosened the collar of his shirt. His body ached slightly, not from exhaustion but from habit. After every patrol or class, a hot bath had become a ritual. He stepped into the bathroom, turned on the water, and waited for the steam to build before sliding into the warm bathtub, sinking in until only his head remained above water. The heat soaked into his muscles, and he let out a long, relaxed sigh. He thought about how he hadn't met many girls from 𝐾𝐮𝐬𝐴 yet and how he hadn't had the chance to watch any of his favorite female heroes live. He felt a mix of shame and resignation wash over him, thinking about the content he had consumed. After about 20 minutes, he finally stepped out, drying himself off with a soft towel before heading back to his room. He was halfway to collapsing onto his bed when his ears perked up. A scream. Faint but real. High-pitched. Feminine. Muffled. His hearing zoned in immediately. It was coming from the back of a van. He paused, realizing it was a kidnapping. His expression hardened as he prepared to act. In a flash, he opened his closet and slipped into his usual black stealth outfit, lightweight and flexible, perfect for quick movement in the shadows. With his hoodie zipped and mask in place, he slipped out onto the balcony. With a burst of wind, he shot into the sky like a black comet, vanishing into the night. Moments later, 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 walked down the hallway in her slippers, gently knocking on his bedroom door. She called out softly, her voice filled with concern and exhaustion, but there was no response. Sighing, she slowly opened the door, greeted by a breeze that swept through the room. The curtains swayed, and the cold night air kissed her face. She stepped in, noticing the bed untouched and the room empty. Her shoulders dropped in worry. With a final sigh, she turned off the light and went to bed, trying not to imagine the dangers her son might be facing. Izuku soared through the cold night sky, cutting through the clouds as his sharp eyes locked onto a speeding van barreling down a highway. The city lights blurred beneath him, cars honking in confusion as the vehicle swerved. Recklessly, he wondered where the police were when they were needed. Adjusting his trajectory downward, he dropped like a missile, landing on the roof of the van with a loud thud. The impact shook the whole vehicle, but he kept his footing. Without hesitation, he blew out a chilling breath, freezing the roof solid, making the metal brittle and easy to crack. With a swift punch, he shattered the frozen metal, creating a gaping hole, and slipped inside. The interior was cramped and dark, the only light coming from flickering dashboard lamps. In the back, a little girl huddled in the corner, trembling in fear, eyes wide as she clutched her knees. He crouched down and offered his hand, reassuring her that he was there to save her. But before he could move closer, she screamed for him to watch out. His eyes widened in alarm, and before he could react, a massive fist slammed into his side, sending him flying through the now open van door. His body skidded across the highway, bouncing off the asphalt with painful force. Izuku grunted as he rolled to a stop, bits of gravel clinging to his hoodie. He groaned, pushing himself up, wondering how the villain had managed to be so silent. He wished for X-ray vision at that moment. Without wasting another second, he shot back into the air and blasted forward, catching up to the van in less than a second. In a streak of black and blue, he crashed back inside. This time, he got a good look at the man. The villain was massive, his arms like tree trunks, fists like bricks, and skin rough like concrete. Veins bulged along his shoulders as he held the girl close, using her as a human shield. The man introduced himself as Brickhand, threatening that the girl would be harmed if Izuku didn't back off. Izuku didn't flinch, he only shook his head slowly. Then, in a blur of speed, Izuku appeared right in front of him, seizing the villain by the throat and lifting him clean off the floor. The girl screamed as Brickhand lost his grip on her, floating in the air as the van continued racing forward below them. Izuku demanded to know where the girl was being taken. Brickhand laughed defiantly, refusing to answer. Izuku narrowed his eyes, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and smirked, suggesting that Brickhand had grown tired of living. With that, he hurled the man skyward, sending him screaming into the clouds. Izuku zipped back down, caught the now crying girl, and placed her gently on the side of the road just as the van finally lost control and crashed into a barrier, smoke rising from the engine. He ensured the girl was safe before turning back to the sky. He shot upward and caught Brickhand mid-descent, gripping him by the collar as they hovered in place. He asked if Brickhand was ready to talk now. The villain screamed that the kids were being taken to the harbor, to a private island for human trafficking. Izuku stared for a second, then nodded, satisfied with the information. Within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flooded the highway as Izuku descended slowly, landing near the wrecked van where officers were already on the scene. Among them was Eraserhead. Aizawa's eyes narrowed the moment he saw Izuku, his hair floating up as he activated his quirk, gaze locked. But Izuku didn't stop. He walked straight past him, dragging Brickhand by the collar and handed him to the nearest officer. With a deepened voice, Izuku informed them that they were traffickers headed to the harbor and urged them to hurry if they wanted to catch the others. Then, with a burst of wind, he took off into the sky again, his cape fluttering behind him like a shadow in the night. Aizawa stood frozen, confused about how Izuku was still flying despite his quirk. Izuku arrived at the scene just as the rusted creak of metal echoed from the docks. His eyes narrowed. Children, little girls and boys, were screaming from inside a massive shipping container, chained and huddled together, their tiny fists banging on the steel walls in panic. The container was strapped onto a tanker, ready to be loaded onto a looming cargo ship. Izuku felt a surge of anger. He landed in front of the ship, sending a gust of wind that rippled across the dark sea. Men emerged from all directions, surrounding him with rifles and machine guns pointed right at his chest. They wore ski masks and bulletproof vests, barking orders he didn't even bother listening to. Izuku raised his hands slowly, as if to surrender. One of them stepped forward, smirking beneath his mask as he aimed his gun directly at Izuku's face, threatening him. In a flash, Izuku shot out his hand, grabbing the man's face and slamming it into the ground with tremendous force. Gunfire erupted instantly, bullets raining in all directions. The rounds bounced off Izuku's skin like pebbles hitting steel, though his outfit began tearing from the impact. He vanished in a blur, reappearing beside one of the gunmen and delivering a roundhouse kick that launched the man straight into the side of the ship. Before any of them could react, Izuku was already behind the next group. He moved like a ghost, untraceable, unstoppable. One by one, they fell, beaten unconscious before they could even scream. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. The port echoed with silence, broken only by the distant cry of approaching sirens. Izuku turned toward the massive container, lifting it effortlessly with both arms before gently placing it down in an open space. He walked to the hatch and yanked it open. What greeted him was a heart-wrenching sight. Dozens of children crouched together, faces streaked with tears, their bodies trembling with fear. Some didn't even look up. He spoke softly, assuring them that they were safe now. Then he turned around and walked away, knowing the ship still had one rat hiding in its belly. Izuku honed in on the heartbeat with ease and strode below deck, finding the captain, a bloated, sweating man, curled up under a table, trying to stay still. He yanked the captain up by the collar and demanded to know where the kids were being taken. The man stuttered, claiming he was just following orders to bring them to some billionaire's private island. Izuku insisted he show him where. By the time the police arrived at the docks, Izuku was already in the air with the captain gripped tightly in one arm. They headed over the sea, past the coastlines, until they reached a secluded island far off near the Bahamas. Izuku landed hard, a crater forming beneath his boots as he dropped the captain onto the sand. There was a towering mansion just ahead, lights flickering from the windows, and the muffled sounds of laughter and music. He could hear everything. Without knocking, Izuku stormed into the mansion, shattering their little fantasy world. Cameras were already floating around him, recording everything. He exposed them, every face, every act, every detail. When the British authorities arrived, they found the mansion in ruins, the guests zip-tied and terrified, evidence plastered all over social media. There was no escaping this. The world thanked him, and the media hailed him as a savior. A child trafficking ring composed of some of the world's wealthiest and most influential men had just been dismantled in a single night. They attempted to reward him with a medal and even a global honor ceremony, but Izuku declined. He offered no statements or interviews. He simply soared into the night, returning home to Japan. The following morning, the world awoke to breaking news unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Screens across Japan, and soon the globe, were filled with footage from the live stream Izuku had broadcast from the billionaire's island mansion. News anchors, reporters, and social media influencers were abuzz with excitement. The news anchor, during a live broadcast, informed everyone that what began as a tip-off about a missing children's trafficking ring had escalated into one of the largest criminal busts in recent history. The so-called hoodie hero, a mysterious vigilante who had remained anonymous since his first appearance, had stormed a private island, exposing some of the world's most powerful elites involved in this heinous trade. An on-site reporter noted that officials at the Ministry of Justice were scrambling to respond. The operation's success was celebrated worldwide, but questions lingered about the vigilante's identity, his methods, and whether the Hero Commission would acknowledge his role. Across social media, hashtags like #HoodieHero, #ChildRescue, and #JusticeServed trended globally, igniting widespread praise and debate. People shared clips from the raid, expressing gratitude and admiration. Fans created artwork and memes, some humorously commenting on the hoodie hero's dark costume and swift movements, while others speculated about his true identity. However, not everyone was supportive. An editorial column in the Daily Sentinel cautioned against vigilantism, arguing that while the hoodie hero's actions saved lives, they also bypassed the law and endangered innocent lives. The writer questioned who this boy was, playing judge, jury, and executioner, and emphasized that Japan's heroes were licensed, trained, and accountable. The masked teenager, however well-intentioned, needed to be stopped before tragedy struck. Inside the Hero Commission headquarters, officials exchanged somber glances. The Commission's PR team hurriedly drafted a statement to acknowledge the rescue without endorsing the vigilante's methods. Meanwhile, some pro-heroes watched the news with mixed emotions, relief for the rescue but frustration that the media spotlight was overshadowing their own accomplishments. Back home, Inko quietly watched the coverage in the living room. With each new headline and viral clip, her worry deepened. She murmured to herself that while she was glad he saved those children, she couldn't help but worry for her son. Elsewhere, Izuku lay on his bed, scrolling through news clips and tweets on his phone. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he observed the outpouring of support and the heated debates. He thought to himself that they didn't know it was him, and it had to stay that way. Locking his phone, he reached for his black hoodie and slipped it on, contemplating how he would fare at you. He felt no fear. Next month he would take the entrance exam, and he couldn't wait. Outside his window, the city buzzed on, unaware that their silent guardian was watching over them, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 1 month later the sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with nervous energy as Izuku stood among other hopefuls outside the entrance exam site. The exam itself had been straightforward, so easy in fact, that Izuku finished well ahead of the crowd, leaving behind puzzled stares and whispered rumors. Stepping out, he felt a familiar rush of accomplishment and relief wash over him. The test was merely another stepping stone, and he was prepared for what came next. Behind him, a familiar presence emerged, Katsuki, glaring fiercely, his jaw clenched tightly. He silently seethed, thinking that Izuku believed he was better than him. If he got into 𝐴, he would prove he was the top of the class, no contest. Izuku let out a soft sigh and began walking home, the quiet streets welcoming him back. He reflected on the fact that he had never met All Might personally, but he was curious about the one who had faced All for One. Whoever they were, he hoped they would find their own path, perhaps even peace. Later, in the comfort of his room, Izuku sank into his gaming chair, his fingers flying across the controller as the familiar sounds of digital battles filled the air, his focus sharp. Suddenly, the door burst open with an enthusiastic bang. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 entered, her face alight with joy as she announced that she had finally beaten Ribbit Power. Izuku replied casually, a lazy smile tugging at his lips as he kept his eyes glued to the screen. 𝐴𝐻𝐿's smile faded slightly as she remembered something important. She informed him that 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 mother was coming to visit, crossing her arms thoughtfully. Izuku paused his game, turning with a smirk and teasingly asking if her son would be coming too. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 confirmed that he would, playfully reminding him that they were friends. Izuku grinned confidently, his eyes gleaming mischievously. 𝐴𝐻𝐿, with a knowing smile, headed toward the door, mentioning that she needed to get ready. As the door closed behind her, Izuku's grin widened, thinking to himself that he was looking forward to seeing her. He chuckled quietly as he resumed battling in the game. An hour later, the doorbell rang. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 dried her hands on a kitchen towel and made her way to the door, her expression lighting up as she saw who it was. She greeted Mitsuki warmly, pulling her old friend into a hug and commenting on how stunning she looked. Mitsuki playfully teased 𝐴𝐻𝐿 about whether there was a new man in her life, to which 𝐴𝐻𝐿 responded with a laugh, brushing a stray hair behind her ear and stepping aside to let them in. Mitsuki expressed excitement to see Izuku, noting it had been a few years since she last saw him. She instructed Katsuki to greet 𝐴𝐻𝐿, who was polite but distant as she motioned for them to enter. Katsuki glanced around the home with thinly veiled irritation, noting the polished surfaces and subtle hints of wealth. He thought bitterly that with this kind of money, Izuku could have easily gone to Horasuma, but he seemed to want to flaunt it instead, making Katsuki resent him even more. Upstairs, Katsuki entered Izuku's room and paused, taking in the gaming setup with its glowing lights, a wall-mounted TV playing soothing music, and shelves filled with books and collectibles. The room was every teenage boy's dream. Izuku, reclined in his gaming chair with a controller in hand, glanced back when he heard the door. He casually greeted Katsuki, ready for whatever came next. What were they playing? Katsuki's voice was low as he responded. They were playing a shooting game. Izuku was invited to join, and he accepted, settling next to Katsuki. The two boys began gaming in silence, an unspoken tension hanging between them. Katsuki thought about how surprising it was that Izuku seemed unfazed by the bullying he had endured. Izuku then asked where Katsuki's mother was, to which Katsuki replied that she was downstairs. Izuku decided to go say hello and slipped on his house slippers before leaving the room. Alone, Katsuki leaned back, his gaze wandering around the room until it landed on Izuku's latest model phone on the desk. A frown crossed his face as he thought about how Izuku might feel superior now that he was wealthy and attractive. He vowed to show Izuku otherwise. Meanwhile, Izuku descended the stairs, the scent of vanilla and fresh polish filling the air. In the living room, Mitsuki and 𝐴𝐻𝐿 were comfortably seated on the couch, sipping wine and sharing laughter over fond memories. When Izuku stepped into view, Mitsuki's laughter halted as she looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. Mitsuki stood up and remarked on how much Izuku had grown, pulling him into a warm embrace. He responded with a cheeky smile, joking that perhaps it was love that had helped him grow. Both women laughed heartily, and Mitsuki playfully warned him not to break any hearts at you. Izuku assured her that he respected women of all ages, especially the older, wiser ones, and charmed her with a kiss on her hand. Mitsuki, taken aback, smirked and declared herself charmed. As Izuku prepared to return upstairs, he hoped they would enjoy their time together. Mitsuki watched him leave and playfully slapped 𝐴𝐻𝐿's thigh, asking what she had taught him. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 laughed, claiming that he had always been good with words, though he didn't flatter her like that since she was his mother. She noted how women often looked at him with admiration when they were out. Mitsuki sighed, expressing that if he weren't underage, she might consider him. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 reminded her that she was married, and they both laughed, clinking their glasses together as they relaxed on the couch. Upstairs, Izuku returned to the room, where Katsuki was still seated, gripping the controller but no longer focused on the game. Katsuki muttered that Izuku had been gone for a while. Izuku casually replied that Katsuki's mother talked a lot, then flopped onto his bed, resting his head on a pillow. Katsuki clicked his tongue, suggesting that his mother probably thought Izuku was some kind of prince now. Izuku raised an eyebrow, questioning if it was because he was no longer living in a cramped space. Katsuki's jaw tightened, and he pretended to focus on the game, though his grip on the controller betrayed his agitation. He eventually admitted that he hadn't meant it that way. Izuku smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, and he remarked that he was no longer the scared kid he once was. The tension lingered until Katsuki begrudgingly complimented Izuku's room, scanning the space filled with posters of famous pro heroes, a sleek computer setup, and a king-sized bed covered in black and green sheets. Izuku explained that he had acquired most of it last year after things improved for his family. Katsuki huffed, expressing envy that everything seemed to be handed to Izuku. Izuku paused, picked up a small photo frame from his desk, and showed it to Katsuki. The picture captured a moment of him and 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 in front of their old, run-down apartment. He quietly reminded Katsuki that nothing had been handed to him, and that he had worked hard for everything. Katsuki looked away, knowing deep down that Izuku was right. He had witnessed Izuku's struggles and resilience, and now he stood taller and more confident. Katsuki muttered that Izuku didn't seem angry after everything he had put him through. Izuku admitted that he had been mad, that he had cried and hated both himself and Katsuki. But he had moved past that fear, finding strength in the support of others and in himself. He smirked, adding that beating Katsuki at their game would be far more satisfying than holding onto a grudge. Katsuki scoffed, trying to mask how much those words affected him. He called Izuku a cocky nerd, to which Izuku laughed, retorting that it was better to be a confident nerd than an insecure gremlin. Their playful banter eased the tension in the room. Downstairs, the moms were engrossed in conversation. Mitsuki swirled her wine glass, her cheeks slightly flushed. She commented on how Izuku carried himself with maturity and confidence, while 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 blushed, acknowledging the way women looked at him. Mitsuki joked that if she were younger and single, she might consider him, but 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 reminded her that she was still married. They both laughed heartily, enjoying the light-hearted moment. Back upstairs, the game had turned competitive, filled with laughter and playful shouts as they fought for the top score. For the first time, Katsuki didn't feel the urge to punch Izuku. As time passed and the moon rose high in the sky, the city outside was quiet, bathed in silver light. Mitsuki and Katsuki decided to stay the night, as it was too late for her to drive. Inside the Midoriya apartment, the laughter and chatter from earlier had faded, leaving only the soft sound of the TV playing reruns in the living room. Mitsuki had enjoyed more wine than she had anticipated, having shared half a bottle with 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and indulged in playful dares from their card game. Her cheeks flushed with residual warmth as she lay next to 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 on the bed. Her friend had already passed out, snoring softly. Mitsuki muttered to herself, sitting up slowly and acknowledging the effects of too much wine. She gently climbed off the bed, stretching her arms above her head with a soft groan before padding toward the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the kitchen light. She rubbed her eyes. Meanwhile, Izuku stirred awake. Half asleep and thirsty, he got up to grab a snack. As he stepped into the hallway, he nearly bumped into someone, Mitsuki. She gasped, stumbling slightly. Instinctively, Izuku's hand shot out, gripping her waist to steady her. His fingers brushed against her bare skin as her pajama shirt had ridden up a bit. She froze for a moment, blinking up at him. He asked if she was all right, his voice calm and casual, but his emerald eyes gleamed in the low light. She blinked again, surprised by how close he was, and thanked him, admitting she wasn't watching her step. He slowly let go of her waist, his touch lingering just a second longer than necessary. Mitsuki cleared her throat and asked about the bathroom. Izuku suggested she use his, as it was closer than the one down the hall, and he led her inside his room. It was neat, cleaner than she expected for a teenage boy. Posters of video games and sci-fi movies adorned the walls, a few weights were by the corner, and a glowing monitor displayed a paused game. She glanced around, impressed, and commented on how nice his room was, teasing that Katsuki must have shown his annoyance. Izuku chuckled, claiming he hadn't noticed. Mitsuki gave him a side glance, knowingly, before disappearing into the bathroom. He leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly as he looked toward the door. When she stepped out, her hair was slightly messy, and her lips were a little parted as if she had rinsed her mouth. She caught him looking and asked where he was going. He explained he was just heading to the kitchen for snacks. Mitsuki smiled and said she could use some too, walking closer and wrapping her arm around his. She asked if she could tag along, and he raised a brow but didn't pull away, agreeing. As they walked down the hallway, her hands softly gripping his bicep, she thought to herself about how he had grown up so fast. They made their way to the kitchen, Mitsuki still with her arm wrapped around him, her steps slightly wobbly from the leftover buzz. She murmured with a soft chuckle that he had grown a lot, recalling how he used to hide behind 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫's skirt just to say hi to her. Izuku smirked, acknowledging that people change. Mitsuki glanced up at him, her eyes lingering a little too long before she turned away with a smirk of her own, commenting on how tall he had gotten and how deep his voice was. They entered the kitchen, where Izuku moved around with casual confidence, grabbing a bag of chips and placing it on the counter. Mitsuki leaned on it, crossing her arms beneath her chest, drawing his attention. She teased him about how surprised she was that his little girlfriends weren't blowing up his phone, describing him as smart, strong, and mysterious. He chuckled, claiming he kept things quiet. She purred that mysterious was always more attractive, and he raised an eyebrow, amused by her tone, playfully asking if she was flirting with him. She laughed, brushing her blonde hair over her shoulder, and teased him about running off like he did when he was younger. He stepped closer, leaning slightly in, still smirking, and said he would just smile and let her keep going. Their eyes locked for a moment, a heavy pause filling the air, charged with unspoken things. Mitsuki's smile wavered, a flicker of realization flashing in her eyes before she scoffed playfully and pushed off the counter, calling him a cheeky brat. She warned him to be careful, as some women liked confident men a little too much. He replied coolly that some women shouldn't test how confident he really was, popping a chip in his mouth. She shook her head with a quiet laugh, walking past him but not before dragging her fingers lightly across his chest. She wished him good night and disappeared back into the hallway, her hips swaying slightly. Izuku stood there for a moment, watching her go, then leaned back against the counter, smirking to himself before crunching into another chip. The next morning after breakfast, Mitsuki and Katsuki were ready to leave. Mitsuki looked refreshed, her hair tied up casually, and her lips glossed just enough to catch the light. As they reached the door, she turned back toward Izuku with the same playful smirk she'd worn the night before. She pulled out her phone and held it toward him, asking for his number for Katsuki, in case they needed to coordinate. Her tone was innocent enough, but the glint in her eyes said otherwise. Izuku caught it instantly, took her phone, typed his number, and handed it back with an easy smile, repeating that it was for Katsuki. As the front door closed behind them, Izuku leaned casually against the hallway wall, arms folded, knowing that the seed had been planted. Back in his room, he dropped into his chair and pulled out his phone, spinning it lazily in his hand. He thought about how in his past life, this was always the first step. He believed in not chasing them but giving them a taste they couldn't forget. Before they even realized it, he would be in their heads, and every time they were alone, they would think about him. It was a game he had mastered, never pushing too hard, never rushing, just leaving an impression strong enough to bloom later into something inevitable. A few days later, the morning air was crisp as Izuku stood before the towering gates of 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. The building loomed ahead, bathed in sunlight, its glass walls gleaming like a promise. He adjusted his school uniform jacket, the faint scent of starch still clinging to the fabric. He thought to himself that it was time to make a name for himself. Taking his first step toward the entrance, he walked with measured confidence, no nerves, no hesitation. His past life had trained him well in the art of presence. As he passed through the crowd of examinees, a familiar sight caught his eye. Uraraka crouched slightly, tying the laces of her sneakers. Her hair shifted in the breeze, a faint flush already on her cheeks from rushing to the gates. Izuku's smirk deepened. He didn't slow down. He walked right past her, his shadow brushing over her as she glanced up for only a second, her eyes catching his face before she quickly returned to tying her laces. No words were exchanged, just the faintest flicker of curiosity in her gaze. Exactly the kind of moment he wanted. Not yet, he thought, stepping forward toward the main building. Izuku entered the massive auditorium and slipped into a seat near the middle, arms casually crossed as Present Mic's booming voice echoed off the walls. The man was practically vibrating with energy, his words spilling out rapidly about villain points, rescue points, and the path to becoming a true hero. Most of the kids around him leaned forward, hanging on every word like it was gospel. Izuku leaned back, legs slightly spread, his expression unreadable. Still as loud as ever, he thought dryly, recalling the man from his future memories. Then came him. A sharp voice cut through the room. 𝐻𝐿𝐴, in all his stiff, robotic glory, stood up, hand raised like a soldier about to file a complaint. His tone was clipped, his posture perfect, his words formal to the point of suffocation. He was scolding Present Mic for failing to address the existence of the 0-point robots, and doing it in the most over-the-top, by-the-book way possible. Yup, Izuku thought, suppressing a smirk. Stuck up even back then. It took me until the Stain arc to actually start liking this guy. When the lecture was finally over, the examinees were herded outside toward the simulation site, an entire mock city surrounded by towering walls. The sight was impressive, but Izuku barely glanced at it. His attention was on the feeling in his muscles as he stretched out his shoulders, arms, and legs. Alright, which powers to use here? Haven't even decided yet? Guess I'll keep it simple. Speed and strength. Flight's too flashy for now, he thought, rolling his neck until it popped. To his side, he noticed 𝗬𝗧𝗟, standing a bit stiff, her eyes darting around the cityscape with a mix of awe and nerves. He asked if she was ready, turning toward her. She blinked, startled by the sudden voice. She admitted to feeling a little scared but smiled sheepishly. He replied that he felt the same and expressed his eagerness to see her in Class A. Before she could respond, a firm hand clamped down on his shoulder. Izuku turned his head slowly, coming face to face with Iida, who looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Iida barked at him not to interfere, insisting that she was trying to focus. Yeah. I definitely hated this guy at first, Izuku thought, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. He then addressed 𝗬𝗧𝗟 directly, asking if he was interrupting her. She quickly shook her head, explaining that talking to him calmed her down. That made Iida freeze. His hand slid off Izuku's shoulder as he gave a stiff bow, apologizing before marching off without another word. The two of them couldn't help but laugh. Izuku smirked, commenting on the situation, and she asked for his name. He introduced himself as Izuku, and she replied that her name was 𝗬𝗧𝗟, expressing that it was nice to meet him. He wished her good luck, and before she could respond again, he faced forward and started walking away toward the gate. Suddenly, Present Mic's voice exploded through the speakers, announcing that the test had already begun. Chaos erupted as students broke into sprints, shouting as they rushed into the mock city. Izuku didn't sprint. He walked forward calmly at first, then, in a flash, he vanished in a blur of speed. The gates hissed open with a metallic groan. Izuku stepped inside with the other examinees, hands in his pockets, his movements unhurried while everyone else exploded into frantic sprints. Some already activated their quirks, blasting forward in bursts of fire, ice, or propulsion. Izuku just walked. In the blink of an eye, he blurred from the starting street to the first robot, a hulking, three-pointer stomping through a mock plaza. His hand shot forward, palm open, and he pushed. The machine flew backward as if it had been hit by a truck, slamming into a wall and crumpling into scrap metal. One down. He didn't even look at it. He was already gone. Observation room, UA faculty Present Mic leaned closer to the monitor, asking who that kid was, noting that he hadn't even seen him move. Aizawa squinted, observing that he was too fast for standard cameras and was holding back, but the control he was showing was impressive. Snipe, arms crossed, remarked that those weren't beginner moves and that the kid had years of experience. All Might, quietly watching from the corner, said nothing but followed every step Izuku made. Back in the field, Izuku flowed through the mock city like water, always appearing where the next target was, dismantling it with minimal movement. One robot had its arm ripped off in a blink, another was flipped onto its back like a helpless turtle, and a third was split in half with one swift kick. He never stayed in one place for more than 2 seconds, meaning other examinees always had chances to score on the robots he left partially disabled. One examinee shouted in amazement that he was leaving them for others to take down, blasting the head off a robot Izuku had crippled moments before. Uraraka, sprinting past another down machine, caught a glimpse of him vanishing around a corner like a phantom. Observation Room Midnight noted that he wasn't just going for points, he was actively ensuring others got chances, which was rare for this stage. Nizu sipped his tea calmly, commenting that it was a display of both skill and awareness, making a name for himself without stepping on the toes of potential future classmates. Vlad King raised a brow, suggesting it felt more like instinct, noting that natural talent like that couldn't be taught. All Might's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the strength and speed as familiar. Izuku suddenly stopped and sat back, his score already more than enough to secure first place. He thought about how they were probably watching him up there and that All Might had no way of knowing who he was, considering he hadn't even shown 20% of his power. Then again, he did have 20%. A mission alert sounded, announcing the objective to save Uraraka again, with a reward of additional points. The ground quaked as a monstrous boom echoed through the mock city. The zero-pointer burst through the side of a skyscraper in a shower of steel and concrete, its titanic frame blotting out the sky. Each step was a seismic event, rattling windows and cracking pavement. Thick plumes of dust rolled over the streets like an incoming sandstorm. Through it all, Izuku's ears caught her voice, Uraraka's panicked cry. In a split second, his body moved. A sonic crack exploded behind him as he launched forward, his boots pulverizing the asphalt where he'd stood. One heartbeat, he was on the ground. The next heartbeat, he was airborne, rising past the broken skeleton of the building the zero-pointer had smashed through. The giant's glowing sensors barely had time to focus on him before Izuku's fist ped back, muscles tensing like a drawn bowstring. The impact was monumental. The air rippled with a shockwave that shattered every remaining window within a 100-meter radius. The zero-pointer's head didn't dent, it imploded, its metal skull crumpling inward as the entire frame was propelled backward like a missile. It tore through 2 more buildings, splitting them apart with ease. Walls burst outward, sending debris raining down in a chaotic storm of glass, steel, and concrete. The monster didn't stop until it crashed through the city's perimeter wall, half buried in rubble, sparks hissing from its damaged frame. In the observation room, Vlad King shouted in disbelief, nearly spilling his coffee as he exclaimed that the power output was abnormal. All Might remained silent, his grip on the armrest tightening until the leather creaked under the pressure. Back in the field, Izuku landed hard, his boots cracking the pavement. Without wasting a moment, he pushed through the settling dust, focusing on Uraraka, who was pinned under a slab of fallen debris. With one arm, he tossed the heavy slab aside as if it were made of cardboard, scooping her up effortlessly. She gasped at the sudden lift, finding herself cradled against his chest as he dashed toward the evacuation gates, the collapsing skyline rumbling ominously behind them. They only halted when the walls of the gate loomed ahead, the dust cloud roaring closer like a wild beast. Izuku checked on Uraraka with a small smirk, asking if she was all right. Her wide eyes met his, and she felt her face flush as she realized how close they were. She managed to reply that she was fine, and he gently set her down. She quickly requested to be put down, stepping back to create some distance. He chuckled an apology and she offered a shy smile, thanking him. Present Mick's voice boomed from the loudspeakers, announcing the end of the chaos. Izuku smiled faintly, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He reflected on how all his efforts had paid off, realizing he had learned to control his power. Otherwise, he might have sent that zero-pointer flying across the entire school. Around him, the sounds of groans and shuffling echoed through the dust-filled air as Recovery Girl hobbled into the scene, her cane tapping against the cracked pavement. She barked at the students to line up so she could patch them up before they collapsed. Izuku glanced at Uraraka, who was still catching her breath, and gave her a casual wave as he said he would see her when school started. As he walked toward the exit with steady confidence, every head seemed to follow him, whispers rippling through the group. Some looked impressed, others intimidated, while a few, like Ida, wore a thin mask over a storm of envy. Ida thought bitterly that Izuku had even saved the girl, realizing he would likely receive the highest marks. Uraraka's gaze lingered on Izuku's back long after he had gone, her blush refusing to fade as she thought he was so cool, biting her lips slightly before she even realized it. Suddenly, she yelped as Recovery Girl's cane tapped her knee sharply. The old woman warned her not to fall for the boy just because he saved her, cautioning that she didn't know how badly that could end. Uraraka quickly defended herself, insisting she wasn't falling for him, her blush deepening. Recovery Girl chuckled knowingly before moving on to the next student, leaving Uraraka staring at the ground, her thoughts swirling. Izuku returned home, the afternoon sun spilling warm light through the windows as he stepped inside. The faint smell of miso soup wafted from the kitchen, but before he could take off his shoes, he spotted his mom standing in the hallway, hands clasped together, eyes wide with anticipation. She asked how it went, her voice carrying a mix of worry and excitement only a mother could have. He replied calmly that he wouldn't receive his results for a week, but he was confident he had passed. Her shoulders relaxed a little, but then her lips curled into a mischievous smile as she teased that she would wait a week before posting about him on her Facebook page for all her followers. She mentioned her online persona, the 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐫, and noted that he hadn't accepted her friend request, giving him an exaggerated pout. Izuku blinked, staring at her for a moment before deadpanning that the name was the reason he hadn't accepted it. He brushed past her toward his room, leaving Inko frozen for a second before she chuckled to herself. As he walked down the hall, he shoved his hands in his pockets, his mind wandering to the name 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐫, which reminded him of a video game he thought he should download. In the UA high school faculty meeting room, the long oval table was stacked with papers, screens, and steaming mugs of coffee. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, but the atmosphere in the room was sharp with focus. President Mike leaned back in his chair, his shades glinting under the lights as he remarked that Izuku Midoriya had style, clean, efficient, and he didn't hog every villain for himself. Midnight tapped her pen against her folder with a smirk, noting that he scored impressively high without going overboard. She mentioned that many top scorers accidentally sabotaged other examinees, but Izuku managed to keep the robots down while leaving opportunities for others to score, showcasing impressive control. 𝐶𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐺 nodded, flipping through the exam footage on a tablet, highlighting Izuku's notable destructive power, especially with his strike on the zero-pointer, which caused minimal collateral damage given the force he used. At the head of the table, Nizu steepled his paws together, his eyes bright with curiosity as he remarked on Izuku's remarkable restraint for someone his age. He noted that it was interesting that Izuku didn't seem to be at his limit, having hit his point goal and then stopped early. Ectoplasm frowned, suggesting that this indicated either Izuku had calculated his score in advance or he was hiding his true strength. Snipe chimed in, suggesting that perhaps Izuku was just humble, as not every powerhouse sought attention. Midnight chuckled under her breath, asserting that Izuku was not humble, pointing out the way the girl had looked at him after the rescue, implying he knew exactly what he was doing. All Might, sitting quietly at the far end, kept his gaze on the table, his mind replaying the single punch on the zero-pointer. The power, the form, the control stirred something within him, and he muttered to himself that the strength and speed felt familiar. Nizu's ears twitched as he asked All Might if it was familiar. All Might waved it off, forcing a smile and stating it merely reminded him of someone he had known long ago. Power Loader scratched his chin, concluding that Izuku was a clear top candidate, with strong academic scores, exceptional physical performance, and the ability to work well in chaos without needing orders. Nizu's smile widened as he declared that it was settled. Midoriya would join Class 1A. I'm quite eager to see how he develops. The conversation drifted to other examinees, but the name Izuku Midoriya lingered in the air, carrying with it the weight of high expectations. 1 week later, Izuku had the acceptance letter from you. Folded neatly in his pocket, but he didn't even need to look at it anymore. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 had already announced it to the world. She had gone straight to her Facebook page, posting about her pride in her son's acceptance alongside a picture of the two of them. Izuku hoped that wouldn't backfire one day as he leaned against the doorframe, watching her hit post. He thought that if anyone tried something with her, it could escalate quickly. Before he could slip back into his room, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐆's phone rang. 𝐬𝐵𝐸 Bakugo's name flashed on the screen. Within minutes, plans were made, and they were in a cab heading toward Katsuki's house. The reason for the invitation was unclear to Izuku, though he had a feeling. For the past few days, he and Mitsuki had been exchanging messages, playful teasing and subtle flirting. Nothing serious, but enough to change the atmosphere between them. She had even sent him a photo one night, wearing a silky nightdress, captioned, "About to sleep, night." He had responded with a casual picture of himself, and her reply had taken over an hour. He understood why. Now, standing outside the Katsuki residence, Izuku looked over the neighborhood he partially grew up in. Memories of childhood scrapes with Katsuki, playground dares, and after-school walks flooded his mind. The front door opened, and Mitsuki stepped out with a bright smile, hugging 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 first. When her eyes met Izuku's, she gave him a quick wink, prompting an instant smirk from him. Mitsuki began, her voice warm, explaining that she wanted to celebrate how both their sons got accepted. She mentioned that her husband wouldn't be home that night and that Bakugo was out with his friends but would return later. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 expressed her gratitude for the invitation and hurried back outside to get snacks from the car. The moment the door shut behind her, the energy in the hallway shifted. Mitsuki leaned casually against the wall, her eyes traveling up and down before settling on his face. Izuku complimented her, stepping closer and lowering his voice. She returned the compliment effortlessly, and he teased her about the delay in her response to his picture. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she explained she had been busy with laundry. As the conversation continued, Izuku felt a spark of connection. Just then he heard his mom's footsteps approaching, and with a smirk, he stepped back, casually entering the living room just as 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨 walked in with a bag of snacks and a case of drinks. Mitsuki turned toward her friend as if nothing had happened, but the faint pink on her cheeks gave her away. Izuku sank into the couch, feeling relaxed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he thought that things were going great. Izuku decided to wander for a bit, curiosity getting the better of him. His footsteps were quiet as he headed up the stairs, glancing at the framed family photos along the wall, most featuring a much younger Bakugo looking just as annoyed as he did now. He stopped in front of a door with a massive sign that read, "Keep out." Without hesitation, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The smell hit him first, a mix of sweat, deodorant, and too many energy drinks. Clothes were scattered across the floor, the bed was a mess of crumpled blankets, and the desk was overwhelmed with books, open notebooks, and empty cans. The windows were tightly shut, trapping the air inside. Izuku stepped back, letting the door swing shut behind him. His eyes drifted to the end of the hallway where one last door stood, neatly painted, with a polished handle. He knew that was Mitsuki's room. He smirked faintly before turning and heading back toward the stairs. Just as he reached the landing, he heard the metallic creak of the front gate swinging open outside, followed by heavy footsteps. The front door slammed open. Bakugo stepped in, wearing his usual scowl, the glow from the streetlight catching the edge of his jawline. He looked around as if the house had offended him, then spotted Izuku coming down the stairs. His frown deepened as he thought bitterly that they had to bring Deku. Izuku greeted him casually, but Bakugo walked past him without a word, his shoulder brushing against Izuku's as he headed upstairs. Izuku didn't bother following him with his eyes. Bakugo wasn't worth the energy tonight. Instead, he strolled into the living room where Mitsuki sat comfortably on the couch with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. She had a small plate of snacks in her lap and glanced at him as he sat down beside her, close enough to share the same bowl of chips. Without looking at her directly, he pulled out his phone and started playing a game, his fingers tapping the screen lazily. Mitsuki popped a chip into her mouth, her gaze flicking toward him every now and then while talking with 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫. The night dragged on in a haze of laughter, snacks, and small talk. Eventually, the clock crept past 10, and 𝐴𝐻𝐿 stretched with a yawn, announcing that it was getting late. She grabbed her bag and said she would go start the car and wait outside. Izuku replied casually that he would be right out. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 smiled at Mitsuki, thanking her for having them over again and congratulating her on Katsuki's acceptance. Mitsuki nodded warmly in return, and the front door clicked shut behind 𝐴𝐻𝐿, the distant hum of the car engine rumbling to life in the driveway. The living room grew quieter, more NTMT somehow. Izuku stood, slipping his phone into his pocket. Mitsuki walked him to the door, her arms folded loosely, eyes scanning him in that familiar way, like she was sizing him up and enjoying the view. She mentioned that she guessed she would see him around, her voice low enough that it felt just for him. Izuku smirked, replying that they still had that conversation to finish. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a sly smile. "We do, don't we?" There was a brief pause, just long enough for both of them to sense the potential of the moment. Izuku stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers in a way that felt intentional. He leaned in, close enough that his breath tickled her ear, warning her to be cautious. He suggested that if she kept looking at him like that, he might start thinking she was interested. Her cheeks warmed, but the smirk on her lips remained. She playfully challenged him, tilting her head slightly. Izuku grinned, their eyes locking for a moment longer before he stepped back, claiming that if she was interested, he would ensure she couldn't stop thinking about him. Mitsuki scoffed lightly, pushing at his chest, urging him to leave before she did something reckless. He chuckled as he stepped out into the night air, wishing her sweet dreams. As he walked toward the car where 𝐴𝐻𝐿 was waiting, he glanced back just in time to see Mitsuki leaning on the doorway, watching him leave with that same unreadable, mischievous smile. Izuku thought to himself that things had progressed quicker than he expected, but he was in no rush. He leaned back in the passenger seat, the faint hum of the car filling the quiet ride home. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 hummed softly to herself, clearly in a good mood from the evening. She didn't ask why he had taken so long to leave Mitsuki's house, and he didn't offer any explanation. When they arrived home, Izuku headed straight for his room, tossing his jacket onto his chair before collapsing onto the bed. The memory of that brief moment lingered in his mind, enough to make him smirk to himself. A little past midnight, his phone buzzed with a message from Mitsuki, checking if he had gotten home safely. He stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Her response came almost instantly, expressing her concern for her favorite UA student. He chuckled and replied, teasing her about being his favorite so quickly. After a longer pause, she complimented his appearance that night, and he returned the sentiment. The final message from her wished him good night, complete with a playful emoji. He locked his phone, still smiling faintly, feeling that something was definitely growing between them. Suddenly, Izuku's sharp ears picked up a faint but urgent cry for help echoing from deep within the city. His eyes narrowed. Without a second thought, he tossed his phone aside, pulled on his black hoodie, gloves, and mask, and stepped out onto the balcony. With a burst of wind, he was gone, soaring high above the glittering skyline. The cold night air rushed past his face, and for the first time in weeks, his heart raced with that familiar thrill. He realized he had missed this feeling. There hadn't been much to do lately, no kidnappers, no cartels, no trouble in the streets. Tonight was different. The city lights blurred beneath him as he closed in on the sound. Soon he spotted the scene below, a lone man sprinting down a narrow street, panic in every step, with a group of suited men hot on his heels. They moved in formation, their tattoos flashing under the streetlights. Yakuza. Izuku adjusted his flight path, preparing to swoop down when suddenly, a booming, heroic theme blared from somewhere. Then he heard a powerful declaration, "I am here." The street shook as All Might landed in front of the fleeing man, his mere presence forcing the Yakuza to freeze. His cape whipped in the wind as he struck a perfect heroic pose. In the next moment he moved with incredible speed, disarming, disorienting, and incapacitating the gang with overwhelming force. Izuku hovered above, watching with a deadpan stare, feeling slightly disappointed that instead of encountering a fellow hero he had run into All Might. He dropped down slowly, landing almost silently behind the number 1 hero. All Might turned, his eyes locking onto Izuku instantly. He greeted him as the hoodie hero, the world's most infamous vigilante. Izuku responded casually, hands in his pockets, asking what was up. All Might mentioned that he had taken Izuku's save, to which Izuku replied that it didn't matter as long as the person was safe. He waved slightly as he stepped back, saying he would catch All Might later. Before the symbol of peace could say anything more, Izuku shot back into the night sky, vanishing between the clouds. All Might remained where he stood, looking up at the empty space above him. A rare, genuine smile formed on his face, wishing that Izuku were a registered hero, believing they would make great friends. Days passed, and soon it was the first day of Yue High. The warm spring morning greeted the city with a gentle breeze. The sakura trees along the sidewalks swayed softly, scattering petals across the streets like pink snow, making the world feel almost too perfect for a Monday. Izuku stepped out of the car after Inko dropped him off a short walk away from the school gates. She wished him good luck, waving from the window. He returned the gesture, adjusting his blazer. The uniform fit him neatly, crisp shirt, blazer perfectly aligned, tie done just right, though his messy, untamed hair betrayed the otherwise clean look. But that was his signature style, and he wouldn't change it for anything. He thought to himself that it was time. Honestly, he wished he didn't already know everything that was going to happen, as it would have made the school experience much more exciting. Yet he was sure plenty of things happened here that never made it into the story. The gates loomed ahead. Walking past them felt surreal, like stepping into a memory he shouldn't have had. After glancing at the map posted near the entrance, he absorbed the layout in less than 10 seconds, every hallway, every shortcut, every emergency exit memorized. As he made his way down the pristine hallway, the right side opened into tall glass windows that revealed the school's training fields. The morning sun poured through, illuminating the vast green grounds and towering gym structures. He slowed his pace, stopping for a moment as the sunlight bathed his face, feeling the warmth soaking into him. He thought about how he would never tire of that feeling. He reached a massive sliding door with a bold 1A plaque above it. Sliding it open, he was immediately greeted by the sharp, overlapping voices of Ida and Katsuki, locked in a heated argument. He sighed, feeling an instant dislike for the situation, and stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with a quiet click. The sound was enough to silence the room instantly. Every head turned to him. He offered a casual smile and raised his hand in a small wave before walking calmly to the back row. His seat, a corner spot, perfect for observing the play. Leaning back, he scanned the room, taking mental notes of every classmate. 19 so far. That meant one was still missing. Right on cue, the door opened again. Uraraka stepped in, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on Izuku almost immediately, and she smiled before making her way toward him. She took the seat directly in front of his, setting her bag down. She greeted him brightly and turned in her seat to face him. He responded, sitting up straighter. She expressed her excitement about being classmates, her voice betraying her enthusiasm. He shared her excitement, his gaze calm but focused on her. She felt her cheeks warm at his words, wondering if he was trying to get to know her better. She replied softly, trying to hide her blush as she faced forward again. Then, without warning, the classroom door slid open. A tall man in a yellow sleeping bag shuffled in, looking like a strange worm crawling into its burrow. Without a word, he stopped at the front of the class and began wriggling out of the bag, emerging like a tired caterpillar from its cocoon. His hair was messy, his eyes half-lidded, and his entire presence radiated a longing to be anywhere but there. He introduced himself as 𝐴𝐻𝐻𝐼𝐻𝑜da, the homeroom teacher, in a flat, almost bored tone. Nobody clapped or moved. Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a sports uniform, holding it up for the class to see. He instructed them to change into their gym clothes and head to the training grounds. The class exchanged uncertain looks but stood up. Izuku followed the crowd to the lockers assigned to them, slipping into his training uniform without rushing. He thought to himself that it was typical of Aizawa to skip introductions and orientation on the first day. When they regrouped outside, the spring sun was warm, but the tension in the air was palpable. Aizawa stood in front of them, hands deep in his pockets, hair swaying slightly in the breeze. He announced that they would be testing their quirks through a set of 8 physical exercises. He pulled out a small board with the list written on it: softball throw, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, endurance running, grip strength, side-to-side stepping, upper body training, and seated toe touches. He reminded them that they had likely done these exercises before, but today they would use their quirks. His eyes shifted to Katsuki, instructing him to start. Katsuki smirked and stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as he took the softball from Aizawa. He stood inside the chalk-marked throwing circle, cracking his neck. With a powerful motion, he pulled his arm back, his palms sparking with miniature explosions. He launched the ball into the sky with an explosive blast, tearing through the air so fast it was barely visible before it vanished over the far edge of the field. A shockwave of hot wind slammed into the rest of the class, making a few stumble back. The smell of smoke lingered in the air. The other students were in awe, but Izuku stood there, unimpressed. He recalled how Katsuki had yelled during the throw and wondered why he had chosen such a dramatic expression. Katsuki turned back toward them with a smug grin, glancing directly at Izuku before walking over to see his score. Aizawa held up the tablet, displaying a remarkable distance. He explained that this was the first step to figuring out what kind of heroes they would become. Kirishima exclaimed in excitement, but Aizawa's tone dropped, reminding them that they were here to train seriously, not for fun. He then introduced a game. The student with the lowest score across all 8 events would be judged hopeless and expelled. A cold wave of dread washed over the class, and students exchanged nervous glances. Izuku sighed internally, reflecting on how every teacher seemed to try to be edgy on the first day. The silence stretched until Aizawa finally spoke again, giving them 5 minutes to prepare for the first test. The class lined up, their first day suddenly feeling a lot less like school and a lot more like survival. Ida went first alongside Tsuyu. His posture was stiff, every step precise, while Tsuyu's frog-like leaps nearly matched his pace. The two crossed the line to polite applause from a few classmates. Next came Uraraka and Ojiro. She floated across the track halfway through, landing lightly while Ojiro used his tail to propel himself forward. Then it was Aoyama and Mina. Aoyama posed dramatically before starting, firing his naval laser to glide forward, more interested in looking fabulous than being fast. Mina sprinted with surprising agility, her acid slicking the ground just enough to give her short bursts of speed. Finally, it was Izuku and Katsuki. The two stood side by side at the starting line. Katsuki's smirk was sharp as sparks danced between his palms. Izuku simply smiled back, calm and relaxed. The machine beeped, signaling the start. Both launched forward instantly. Izuku's stride was smooth and effortless, while Katsuki detonated tiny blasts at his feet to propel himself forward. Despite the explosions, the gap didn't close. They crossed the line, with Izuku finishing first. Izuku noted his time, unfazed by the competition. Up on the sideline, Aizawa frowned, narrowing his eyes as he observed Izuku's performance. The grip strength test came next. Izuku wrapped his hand around the device, giving what seemed like a casual squeeze, causing the machine to snap in half, failing to register any number. The side-to-side stepping was next. Izuku moved so quickly that it seemed as if he had split into multiple copies of himself, his incredible speed creating a swirling dust tornado that caused a few students to shield their faces. Then came the softball throw. Izuku stepped into the circle, flexing his wrist once before gripping the ball. He gave it a light flick, using only a fraction of his strength. The sound of the throw echoed as the ball shattered the sound barrier, disappearing into the clouds before anyone could blink. It didn't just leave the school, it was already well on its way to another district. Izuku thought casually about where it might land as he turned back to the stunned faces watching him. Even Katsuki's usual scowl faltered for a moment. Mina's jaw dropped, and Kirishima muttered that it was incredibly manly. Aizawa's lips twitched slightly upward, recognizing that Izuku was taking this seriously. However, he still needed to see Izuku's true limits. After the last test ended, Aizawa approached him and stated that he would be retaking the 50-meter dash. Izuku simply smiled and agreed. They returned to the track, and Izuku crouched into position, his eyes half-lidded. The starting beep sounded, and before anyone could blink, he was gone. A massive blast of displaced air followed in his wake, throwing dust into Aizawa's face and sending a gust strong enough to make a few students stumble. The machine beeped twice, confused, before displaying the result, 0 seconds. The class froze, processing what they were seeing. Some thought it was a glitch, while others realized it wasn't. Aizawa smirked fully this time, his scarf shifting slightly in the breeze. Acknowledging the impressive feat after the dust settled, Aizawa stood with his hands in his pockets, scanning the group. A few students were still whispering and glancing at Izuku, their curiosity piqued. Katsuki stood rigid, arms crossed, his jaw clenched tightly. Aizawa began to speak about the rumor that the lowest score would get expelled, and half the class held their breath. He revealed that it was a lie, causing some students to slump in relief while Mina groaned in frustration. Aizawa explained that the pressure was meant to push them past their comfort zones. He pulled out a small tablet and displayed the rankings clearly. As eyes darted toward the top name, Izuku stood with his hands in his pockets, not looking particularly impressed. Aizawa instructed them to return to class after changing, emphasizing that training didn't stop there. Some students lingered to compare numbers. Uraraka shot Izuku a quick glance, a small smile appearing on her lips. Bakugo, however, looked like he was seconds away from exploding with determination. He thought to himself that he would reclaim his spot at the top. Izuku smirked faintly, feeling that he had already made an impression on his classmates. Todoroki's gaze lingered on Izuku's name, curiosity flickering in his usually calm expression. Uraraka turned in her seat to glance back at Izuku, her cheeks warming slightly as she acknowledged his achievement. Izuku, sitting lazily with his hands in his pockets, downplayed it, attributing his success to luck. Yaoyorozu, crossing her arms with a knowing smile, remarked that such performance required skill. Katsuki, gritting his teeth, vowed to take back his position. Aizawa's voice cut through the chatter, reminding them that the rankings didn't mean much at this stage and that their future would depend on consistency. He stifled a yawn and instructed them to return to class. As the school day returned to normal, the excitement of hero training faded into the background, replaced by the routine of classes like English, math, and history. However, Class 1A had started their day with something thrilling. When the bell rang for break, the classroom buzzed with energy as chairs scraped back and bags zipped open. Kirishima expressed his hunger, joking about eating a whole cow. Izuku grinned and stood up, his eyes shifting toward Uraraka, who was quietly packing her things. He casually asked if she wanted to eat together, and she nodded quickly, a faint smile on her lips. As they walked side by side out of the classroom, several pairs of eyes followed them, especially from the girls in class, who wondered about their relationship. Uraraka hesitated before asking about Izuku's quirk. He explained that it was a combination of strength and speed, joking that his mom suggested he call it Superman. Uraraka giggled, liking the name for its powerful connotation. They soon reached the lunchroom, where the delicious aroma of fresh rice, grilled meats, and warm bread filled the air. The space buzzed with noise, first years chatting, second years bragging, and third years laughing loudly at their own inside jokes. Izuku and Uraraka grabbed trays and stepped into line. Mina Ishido's cheerful voice chimed from behind, asking if she could join them. Izuku welcomed her, saying the more, the merrier. Mina grinned and hopped into line beside them, greeting Uraraka warmly, who returned the gesture with a polite smile. After getting their plates, Izuku opting for a balanced meal, Uraraka piling hers with rice, and Mina choosing the spiciest curry they could find, they found an empty table and sat together. Izuku inquired about Mina's quirk, and she proudly revealed that it was acid, explaining that she could secrete a corrosive liquid from her body. Izuku encouraged her, saying that with training, she would realize how awesome it truly was. Mina smiled wider, a light blush dusting her cheeks, grateful for his support. Turning to Uraraka, Izuku expressed his curiosity about her quirk. She explained that it was called zero gravity, and demonstrated by making a spoon float before tapping it again to let it clink back onto the tray. Mina leaned forward, impressed, and remarked on Uraraka's impressive performance during the softball throw. Uraraka laughed sheepishly, scratching the back of her head. Izuku watched them both with an approving smile, thinking about his goal not just to be a great hero himself, but to help them unlock their hidden potential. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter, broken only by bursts of laughter and the clatter of trays. As they sat at the corner table, other classmates began drifting by, initially out of curiosity. A few glanced over, trying to figure out who was sitting with whom, but soon, more eyes lingered on Izuku, who was simply talking, listening, and smiling. Mina, between bites, asked if he had already memorized the whole school layout. Izuku casually replied that it wasn't hard once he had seen the map, as he was good at remembering details. Just then, a playful voice chimed in, asking if he was also good at remembering faces. They turned to see Toru Hagakure, the invisible girl, leaning toward them. Uraraka smiled at her, and Toru cheerfully asked if she could join them, promising not to steal their food. Izuku gestured to the seat, joking that he might have to guess where her plate was. Toru giggled and set her tray down without spilling anything, joining in on the conversation. Izuku asked her about her quirk, and she proudly explained that her invisibility was always on and that she was working on making it useful for combat and stealth rescues. Izuku was impressed, noting that it could be a game-changer if used correctly. Toru beamed at his praise, saying he was nicer than she expected, teasing him about his tall and mysterious appearance. As the conversation continued, Momo Yaoyorozu passed by with her tray. She hesitated for a moment, noticing how engaged everyone was with Izuku, and offered a polite nod, asking if she could join them. Izuku welcomed her immediately, shifting his tray to make room. Momo sat gracefully, intrigued by their discussion about quirks and their real-world applications. Izuku grinned, noting that he was analyzing their potential and encouraging them. By the time lunch ended, their table had grown into a small cluster of Class 1A students. The conversation shifted away from school topics, becoming light and filled with laughter. As the bell rang and everyone began clearing their trays, Mina leaned toward Uraraka with a small smirk, commenting on how interesting Izuku was. Uraraka glanced back at him, who was walking ahead with his hands in his pockets, and agreed. After the break, the rest of the day passed in a blur of regular classes: English, history, math. Nothing particularly exciting after the adrenaline rush of the morning's quirk tests. By the time the final bell rang, students were ready to go home. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, giving them his usual tired stare and reminding them that today was just a glimpse of the hardships they would face at the school. As students packed their bags and chatted among themselves, Izuku slung his bag over his shoulder and told Uraraka and Mina he had to head out first, promising to see them tomorrow. Stepping into the warm afternoon, he glanced at his phone, pulling up a map to look for nearby food spots, thinking it would be good to make a mental list for after-school meetups. A light tap on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts. Turning, he found Momo Yaoyorozu standing there, her posture poised yet approachable. She greeted him softly and asked what he was up to. Izuku explained he was checking for places to eat. Momo agreed it was a good idea, admitting she hadn't explored much either. When he asked if she was waiting for someone, she admitted she was, though she hadn't called them yet. Izuku suggested they grab something together to get to know each other better, expressing his interest in learning more about his classmates. Momo laughed lightly at his suggestion. "My dream is to have study sessions with everyone in class someday. I'd love for you to be part of that. And yes, grabbing a bite sounds nice." As they crossed the street into a small shopping district, Momo found herself sneaking curious glances at him. She had looked over the results earlier and noted he was number 1 in the tests. But she had never even heard of him before. No connections, no records, no media mentions. How does someone like that just appear? Izuku began casually, mentioning that she was the daughter of the Yaoyorozu family, acknowledging the pressure that came with it. Momo admitted it had its moments, especially since she was the sole heiress to all their businesses. However, she expressed that she wasn't focused on that. Her priority was to forge her own path as a pro-hero. Izuku found her ambition admirable, feeling that it put his own goal to shame. When she asked about his goal, he shared his longing to become the best hero the world had ever seen, acknowledging it as a selfish ambition. Momo reassured him that it was not selfish, especially given the state of the world. She believed that with the right training and guidance, he could step into the role of a hero when All Might retired. Surprised by her matter-of-factness, Izuku felt encouraged by her belief in him. He expressed his eagerness for the day they could patrol together, which made Momo laugh softly. They wandered through the shopping district until the savory smell of fresh food led them to a small, stylish cafe nestled between a bookstore and a flower shop. It looked clean and cozy, with big windows letting in warm afternoon light and small potted plants lining the counter. Momo remarked on the cafe's charm, and Izuku agreed, noting it wasn't too crowded. A waitress greeted them with a smile and led them to a small booth by the window. Momo slid in gracefully, setting her bag beside her, while Izuku took the seat across from her, scanning the menu. They ordered quickly. Momo chose a light pasta with tea, while Izuku opted for a chicken sandwich with fries and a large soda. As they waited, Izuku rested his chin on his hand and asked Momo about her study sessions. She explained that she believed teamwork and understanding peers were essential, recalling how she hosted sessions for her friends in middle school, which helped them improve. Izuku teased her about acting like a class representative, and she playfully raised an eyebrow, curious about his background. Izuku shared that he had seen and done a few things outside the classroom, which helped him understand people better. Momo leaned in, intrigued, but he kept his response vague, mentioning that helping others felt worthwhile, whether on a large scale or just lending a hand. Their food arrived, breaking the moment. Halfway through their meal, Momo asked if he had been holding back during the 50-meter dash. Izuku smirked, admitting he had. She pointed out that he had moved like someone who knew their speed but had deliberately paced himself. Izuku chuckled, suggesting he didn't want to ruin anyone's confidence on the first day. Momo speculated that he might have been waiting for the right moment to showcase his abilities, noting how he outshined everyone in the retake. They shifted to lighter topics, discussing favorite foods, opinions on the school layout, and quirks of their classmates. When they stepped back out into the fading sunlight, Momo checked her phone and noted her driver was a few minutes away. Izuku offered to wait with her, and they stood near the curb, enjoying the warm breeze carrying the scent of fresh flowers. Before her car arrived, Momo remarked that he was interesting and expressed her intention to figure him out one day. Izuku looked forward to that, watching her car drive off before turning to head home. He thought about how sharp she was, realizing she might be the only person who could understand him intellectually. Just as he took a few steps, a sharp, panicked scream pierced the air, coming from a narrow, dimly lit alley nearby. The sound was raw and desperate, demanding attention. Izuku's expression hardened instantly. Without hesitation, he turned and walked quickly back toward the cafe, pushing the door open as the bell chimed above him. He casually asked the barista for the bathroom, masking his urgency. After receiving directions, he slipped inside, locking the door behind him. In seconds, his uniform shirt was off, replaced by a black hoodie and matching briefs. He added a sleek black mask that covered his lower face entirely, pulling the hood up and tightening the drawstrings until his face was shadowed, his eyes glinting faintly beneath the fabric. With a single glance at the small window, he confirmed it was just wide enough. He slid it open, the cool evening air rushing in, carrying faint echoes of the scream again, this time weaker, as if the victim's voice was fading. His grip tightened on the sill, and in one smooth motion he vaulted through the window, landing silently on the rooftop. With a sharp burst of force, he propelled himself into the air, the city blurring beneath him as he raced toward the source of the cry. Izuku arrived just in time to save the girl from the man, slamming the assailant against the wall with enough force to incapacitate him. She clung to herself, trembling, while Izuku secured the man's hands behind his back with a cord from his hoodie pocket. He calmly instructed her to call the police, his voice steady through the mask. She fumbled with her phone, dialing, and within minutes, a patrol car arrived. Izuku skirted the man to the officers, handing him over without ceremony. One of them tried to express gratitude, but before they could even blink, he had already leapt into the sky and vanished. He reminded himself mid-flight about the importance of consent, deciding that he would probably record her agreeing before proceeding. He was just being cautious. By the time he returned to the cafe, it was as if nothing had happened. He slipped in through the bathroom window, changed back into his uniform, and gathered his belongings before heading home at a leisurely pace. The short walk back was convenient, enough time to think about the next day. He had filled out the form for his hero suit and hoped they would follow every detail he had provided, a faint smirk appearing on his lips. When he walked through the door, 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 was already emerging from the kitchen, a warm smile on her face. She greeted him cheerfully, asking how school had been while taking his bag from his shoulder before he could respond. He shrugged, saying it had been boring and they hadn't done much of anything. 𝐻𝐿𝐻𝐿 replied that he would surely have something fun to do the next day and eagerly moved toward the couch, excitedly suggesting they order something from TMU, having seen many appealing offers. Her enthusiasm made him suspicious. Izuku sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He told her it was fake, and her eyes widened in genuine shock. She gasped, clutching the phone as if it had betrayed her. He chuckled, shaking his head as he walked past, advising her to stick to the usual sites to avoid scammers in their home. Later that night, while Izuku was engrossed in playing 𝗧𝗓𝗧𝗟𝗘, a loud explosion shattered the quiet. His eyes darted toward the window. The glow in the sky indicated it was coming from deep in the city, Shizuoka Prefecture. That was where he used to live. He set down his controller as a familiar alert echoed in his mind, and a mission board appeared before him. A new mission had been issued: stop the escaped giant without destroying part of the city and meet 𝗀𝗀𝗱𝗃. The reward included a power increase and a fake voice mask. He thought about how useful that could have been when he had a squeaky voice, smirking faintly. Without wasting another moment, he quickly changed into his black vigilante outfit, hoodie, reinforced black breathes, gloves, and mask. Once ready, he slipped out of his room window, rose into the air, and tore into the night sky, leaving behind a crack of sonic thunder. Mid-flight, he slowed slightly, a thought crossing his mind about the noise he was making. He chuckled at the idea of Batman triangulating his location off that sound. His eyes drifted downward, taking in the view as he flew over the quiet suburbs, the soft golden light of street lamps bathing the roads. He noticed clusters of homes that looked peaceful under the starlit sky. He mused about how other people were living their lives at that moment. He lowered his altitude briefly, gliding over a small family home. Through the window, he saw a family of 4 gathered around the dinner table, laughing and enjoying a normal life. Upstairs, a teenage boy was glued to his phone screen before slowly pushing his chair back. Izuku smirked, thinking about how everyone was living their own lives before blasting forward again, a streak of black cutting through the moonlight. When he arrived at the scene, the sound of sirens and panicked shouting filled the air. Down the road, a massive man, easily twice the height of a truck, was charging through the streets. His footsteps sent tremors through the asphalt, and each kick he delivered to parked cars sent them skidding or flipping over. Thankfully, Izuku noticed he wasn't stomping directly on people. His rampage seemed focused on property, not lives, at least for now. From below, a familiar figure appeared, a lady, already preening herself in a compact mirror. She adjusted her hair, checked her lipstick, and then grew in size until her towering form matched that of the giant. Izuku thought of a movie he had watched back on Earth, recalling a character who had faced similar challenges. 𝗀𝗀𝗱𝗃's voice boomed across the street, urging the giant to calm down before causing more destruction. The giant didn't respond with words. Instead, he ripped a streetlight from the ground and swung it like a baseball bat. 𝗀𝗀𝗱𝗃 nimbly dodged back, but the man kept swinging, each arc smashing into buildings and shattering windows, debris raining down onto the streets. While his aim was wild, the collateral damage was accumulating quickly. 𝗀𝗀𝗱𝗃 sidestepped another swing but slipped, crashing hard onto her back. She grimaced as she rubbed her tailbone, looking up just in time to see the giant raising the streetlight for a final blow. Suddenly, a blur of black cut through the space between them. A gloved hand caught the streetlight mid-swing, stopping it cold. The metal pole groaned under the strain but didn't move another inch. The giant blinked in disbelief, pulling hard, but Izuku's grip was unyielding. Without another word, Izuku yanked the weapon away, seized the man by his shirt, and shot skyward, leaving the ground in a roaring gust. The city shrank beneath them until they were floating high above the clouds. He calmly asked the giant why he was destroying the city, emphasizing the danger he posed to innocent people. The giant gritted his teeth, expressing his frustration about being judged for being homeless and feeling neglected by the city. Izuku listened, understanding the bitterness in his voice. He felt the weight of the man's words, realizing how cold the world could be. Many people simply walked past those in need, and he couldn't help but think about how many powerful individuals were struggling in silence. His eyes narrowed as he noticed 2 small puncture marks on the man's neck, each still faintly bleeding. He pointed them out, but the man quickly covered the spot, shaking his head and insisting it was just a mosquito bite. "I'm not great with heights." Before Izuku could inquire further, the man's size began to shrink, his massive frame compressing until he returned to normal human proportions. With a sigh, Izuku descended, landing in the city where police had already surrounded the area. The lady was still rubbing her sore backside, grimacing. The officers immediately swarmed the man, stun guns at the ready, before skirting him into the back of a van. As they drove off, Izuku stood there, watching quietly, wishing he could do something about it. A hand suddenly rested on his shoulder. The lady, peering around his mask to get a closer look, remarked on his height. He responded with a compliment, noting her unexpected charm. She grinned, suggesting they should go on patrol together sometime. Izuku nodded toward the armed police glaring at him, acknowledging that he was not exactly on their good side. She smirked, expressing her indifference, and stepped closer, muttering something low and quick before turning on her heel and striding away. Izuku shook his head and, before any of the officers could react, blasted off into the night. The lady's gaze followed his silhouette until it vanished into the clouds, her smirk lingering. He arrived back home quietly, slipping through the door without waking his mother. The night air still clung to his clothes, carrying the faint smell of exhaust fumes from the city. Inside his room, he peeled off the black hoodie and mask, folding them neatly before tossing them onto a chair in the corner. His hero suit came off next, and he laid it flat on the bed, the fabric still warm from his body heat. Lying back, he stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events of earlier. His thoughts inevitably circled back to 𝗀, recalling her invitation to meet the next day on top of Channel 6 radio station. He wondered what she really wanted, a patrol, a talk, or something else entirely. He chuckled to himself, contemplating how he would handle any unexpected situations, considering how he felt in his hero suit. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of his computer. Then the vibration from his desk made him sit up. He grabbed his phone and glanced at the screen. A message from Mitsuki appeared. She asked if he was awake, and he smirked, quickly typing back that he was. The reply came almost instantly, asking if he wanted to video call. Without hesitation, he agreed, leaning back on his bed with a knowing look on his face. The screen lit up, and after a moment, Mitsuki's face appeared. She was lying on her side in bed, the dim glow of a bedside lamp casting warm light on her features. Her hair was a little messy, and her voice was quiet when she greeted him. Izuku noticed the faint sound of breathing from the other side of the bed and caught the shape of a man's shoulder under the blanket. He thought about how her husband was right there, yet she still called him. Mitsuki leaned a little closer to the camera, lowering her voice even more, suggesting she wanted to check up on him. He teased her about missing him, and she smirked, leaving it open to interpretation. As they talked, Mitsuki casually adjusted her blanket, sitting up just enough to let the strap of her nightgown slide off one shoulder. Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly, and he leaned a little closer to his phone, playfully accusing her of being mischievous. Innocence, claiming she was just getting comfortable. Then, with deliberate slowness, she tugged at the fabric, pulling the neckline down just a fraction more before letting it fall back into place. Izuku exhaled, trying not to grin too widely, aware of her teasing nature. She whispered, suggesting she enjoyed knowing he was watching her while her husband was completely clueless. That hit him harder than he expected, and Mitsuki seemed to notice, her smirk deepening. She wished him good night, letting the words linger like a promise before ending the call. Izuku stared at the dark screen for a moment, running a hand through his hair, feeling a rush of emotions. He opened his drawer and pulled out a certain device he had intended to discard. He thought about how he would need it again, giving it a small pat before setting it down on his desk like an old friend. The next day, Izuku got ready for school. Inko drove him there soon after, humming to herself as she pulled up to the front gates. She called out to him to have a good day as he stepped out. He replied and adjusted his bag over his shoulder. As he walked through the gate, he caught sight of Momo standing near one of the sakura trees, phone in hand. He greeted her, and she slipped her phone into her pocket as she walked toward him. He asked if she had been waiting for him, and she smirked, claiming she hadn't but suggesting they walk to class together. Without waiting for his answer, she started ahead at a casual pace. Izuku shook his head and caught up, falling into step beside her. After a moment, he suggested that he should get her number. She agreed, suggesting they exchange contact information. They both pulled out their phones and linked them, confirming their accounts had connected. Momo playfully warned him not to be shocked if she texted him at 3 a.m., admitting she was an overthinker. He replied that he would probably ignore the text, even if he was awake. She pouted slightly, asking why, and he simply replied, leaving her with a hint of amusement in her eyes. She narrowed her eyes at him, making a mental note, but there was no malice in her tone as she remarked that he was strange. He agreed, feeling a sense of camaraderie as they continued toward class. But at least I'm interesting. As they walked down the hallway, Momo glanced at him from the corner of her eye. She was genuinely curious about his experience at you. So far. Izuku shrugged, expressing that it was only his second day. He found it different from what he expected, but in a good way. The teachers and classmates were intriguing. Momo tilted her head slightly, asking how he found them interesting. Izuku smirked, hinting that she would figure it out eventually. She let out a soft hum, contemplating whether to press for more details but decided to change the subject. She expressed her curiosity about the next training session, recalling that yesterday's quirk test had been intense. Izuku casually complimented her performance, noting that she did better than most people realized. Momo smiled at the compliment, appreciating his words. They reached the large sliding door of Class 1A, and Momo stepped inside first, greeted by the chatter of her classmates. Izuku followed, raising a hand in a small wave as he made his way to his seat at the back. As they settled into their spots, the low hum of conversation resumed, though a few pairs of eyes lingered on them for a moment longer. Uraraka arrived a minute later, slipping into the room with a bright smile. She greeted the class and headed straight to the seat in front of Izuku, who glanced up from his phone and casually acknowledged her. The class erupted into teasing voices, and Mina popped up beside Uraraka, grinning as she asked if Uraraka had come up with a nickname for her boyfriend. Uraraka's cheeks flushed as she insisted they were not dating, but Mina playfully teased her about taking Izuku for herself. Uraraka shot back, trying to maintain her composure. Mina continued her playful banter, asking Izuku for his contact information. He readily agreed, and they exchanged details quickly, leaving Mina with a faint blush. As she returned to her seat, Uraraka felt a small twist in her chest, realizing it hurt a little to watch that happen. Izuku leaned forward slightly, casually suggesting they share contact information. Uraraka nodded shyly, and they exchanged accounts, prompting others in the room to do the same. The energy in the class grew lively, while Katsuki ignored everyone, leaning back in his seat with his usual scowl, and Todoroki remained silent, brooding as always. Across the room, Momo caught Izuku's gaze and smiled at his wink. She thought about his powerful influence, feeling a small smile tug at her lips. Soon, the chatter quieted as Aizawa strolled in, taking attendance with minimal effort, and the day settled into the usual rhythm of classes. Izuku took neat notes during the lessons, jotting down exercise instructions for later. When the bell rang for break, he stretched and decided to explore the school. He left the classroom, stopping by a vending machine to grab a few snacks before wandering down the hallway, eager to discover every corner of you he hadn't seen yet. As he strolled, unwrapping one of his snacks, he admired the photographs of past graduating classes, the 𝐬𝐴 award displays, and hero costumes encased in glass for inspiration. He passed a group of support corps students working on a half-finished mech suit and a couple of general studies kids chatting in a corner. The atmosphere was light, with a spring breeze filtering in through open windows. Then he turned a corner and stopped. Standing in front of a vending machine in full costume was Midnight. She casually sipped from a bottle of soda while scrolling on her phone, her outfit gleaming under the hallway lights. Izuku blinked, surprised to see a pro hero during break. Midnight noticed him pause and recognized him as the kid who excelled in the entrance exams. She thought it would be nice to invest in such a promising youth. With a playful yet smooth voice, she acknowledged him as a new face and guessed he was one of the first years. Izuku confirmed her assumption, expressing his surprise at running into a pro hero. Midnight smirked, slipping her phone into her belt with a casual movement. She remarked that heroes were everywhere at you, and noted his confident posture, suggesting she had seen him before. Izuku shrugged, claiming he just had one of those faces. Midnight crossed her arms, leaning against the vending machine, drawing attention with her posture. She appreciated his directness, noting that a student who didn't look like a nervous wreck was rare, especially around someone like her. Izuku chuckled, acknowledging her comment about not looking like a freshman. Midnight grinned wider, encouraging him to keep his confidence but warned him not to let it turn into cockiness. Izuku promised to keep that in mind, meeting her gaze without flinching. Midnight gave a small, approving hum before pushing off the vending machine, her perfume trailing faintly as she brushed past him. She wished him good luck, leaving Izuku feeling invigorated by the encounter. Maybe she would see him in action, she thought as she walked away, glancing back with a mischievous glint in her eyes. If he ever wanted some private lessons, he could just knock on the faculty lounge door after hours. With a wink, she continued down the hall, her heels clicking rhythmically. He had always had a crush on her and wouldn't mind those extra classes. With a smirk, he turned and continued his exploration. He wandered around for a bit, spotting familiar faces from Class B, a few support corps students, and even some third years. He didn't stop to chat. He already had enough on his plate with Class 1A. By the time he made his way back, the bell rang, signaling students to take their seats. Izuku stepped inside and slid into his chair as if nothing had happened. Uraraka turned around, her head tilted in curiosity, and asked where he had gone. He casually replied that he wanted to get a better look at the school, mentioning that he had walked to the top floor for a nice view. She smiled and asked if he had checked his phone. Pulling it out, he saw a flood of notifications from the class group chat, all asking where he was. Looking up, he noticed almost everyone staring at him. Mina was pouting, Kaminari looked overly dramatic, and even Todoroki's gaze flicked his way, though it was hard to tell if he cared. Katsuki merely gave his usual glare, which said he was annoyed but not angry. Izuku shrugged, sounding anything but apologetic. He thought about why they were so concerned about him. Maybe it was because he had that main character aura. It made sense, but he just wanted to impress the ladies. He leaned back in his chair with a smirk, realizing this was a good opportunity to start his plan to win over every girl in the class. He rested his chin in his hand, surveying the room like a king. Suddenly, the door slammed open with enough force to rattle it on its track. All Might's booming voice filled the air as he strode in, larger than life. The room erupted with excitement. Kirishima practically bounced in place, shouting that it was All Might. Kaminari's eyes widened as if he were seeing a celebrity for the first time. All Might struck his iconic pose, grinning widely, and announced that hero basic training would put them through special training designed to mold them into the great heroes of tomorrow. Today's activity was battle training. Momo adjusted her posture with interest, asking if they would be fighting against each other. Ida stood as if expecting orders, eager to know more. All Might waved their questions off, announcing they would need their hero costumes. He pressed a button on a remote, causing the back wall of the room to split open, revealing mechanical arms with numbered storage cases. In accordance with the quirk registry, based on their requests, they would now wear their hero costumes. The room erupted in cheers and chatter, everyone excitedly discussing their designs. All Might urged them to settle down and instructed them to change and come out in ranking order to ground beta. Izuku headed to the boys' locker room, opening his container to reveal his costume. A sleek black suit reminiscent of Superman, minus the cape. It felt nice as he slid it on, flexing his shoulders. The material was not as good as his real suit, but it would do for now. Stepping outside, the sun's warmth enveloped him, and he felt energized as the solar energy soaked into him. He thought about how black would help him absorb sunlight better. When he went pro, he would switch to the classic blue and red or maybe black and red. Either way, it would look amazing. Kirishima gave him a thumbs up, complimenting his suit and asking what the stood for. Izuku explained that it was not actually an S, but a symbol that meant hope. Kirishima looked ready to tear up, calling Izuku a real man. Izuku laughed and suggested they get moving before All Might scolded them. Mineta jogged up, asking if Izuku wanted to hang out after school. Izuku casually agreed, having seen he was added to the boys' group chat. 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 mentioned they had everyone except Bakugo and Todoroki. When Izuku asked if they had been asked, 𝐻𝗳𝗓 sheepishly admitted they had not. Izuku decided to go ask them, believing it was important to unite as a class for good team chemistry. Kirishima's eyes sparkled with admiration, and he asked if he could call Izuku Big Bro. Izuku smirked, agreeing but asking him not to do it in front of the girls to maintain his aura. Kirishima gasped, feeling like he had been handed the secrets of the universe. The other boys chimed in, asking if they could also call him Big Bro. The only one who didn't say anything was Ida, who was silently chewing on his pride, thinking how cool Izuku was. Meanwhile, All Might stood near the training field with the girls, who were already in their hero costumes, waiting for the boys to arrive. Momo crossed her arms in mild irritation, wondering where they were. Jiro muttered that they were probably doing something weird. All Might chuckled, making a comment about women taking longer to get ready, which caused the air to go dead silent. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto him, and Hagikure's sharp voice questioned his comment. Uraraka puffed her cheeks in indignation, insisting they didn't take long. Mina added that some of them were ready in under 2 minutes. All Might immediately raised his hands defensively, apologizing loudly. He noted to himself never to make generalized comments about women again, feeling a cold bead of sweat roll down his temple. The boys finally arrived a minute later, dressed in their hero costumes, some flashy, some tactical, and some quite questionable. Mina exclaimed in relief at their arrival, throwing her hands in the air. "What were you doing, a fashion show?" Izuku casually responded while walking at the front of the group. He mentioned that he was just uniting the boys and assured them they would thank him later. Kirishima grinned, claiming it was Big Bro's idea. Jiro raised an eyebrow, glancing between them, but Izuku smirked and advised her not to ask. All Might clapped his massive hands together, the sound echoing across ground beta. He announced that now that everyone was present, they could begin. With his cape billowing slightly in the breeze, he explained that today's training would be a battle exercise designed to simulate a real-life combat scenario. Unlike regular combat training, this exercise focused not just on fighting but also on strategy, teamwork, and quick thinking. He paused, scanning the eager faces before continuing. The class would be divided into 2 teams, heroes and villains. The villains would guard a symbolic bomb hidden inside a building, while the hero's objective would be to capture the villains or secure the bomb before time ran out. The villains would win if they successfully defended the bomb until the timer ended or if they captured the heroes. Uraraka asked about the capture aspect, and All Might confirmed that heroes could win by restraining villains with capture tape, just as villains could use it to trap the heroes. Once taped securely, a participant would be out, emphasizing the need for decisive and well-thought-out moves. Momo raised her hand to inquire about property damage. All Might responded that while some damage was allowed, reckless destruction could be dangerous, as it could put innocent lives at risk in a real battle. He encouraged them to be smart about their actions. Ida straightened his posture and asked about the time limit. All Might informed them that they would have 10 minutes, with a timer starting the moment the exercise began. If neither side completed their objective within that time, the villains would automatically win. To ensure fairness, All Might would monitor their movements via security cameras throughout the building. He stepped forward, casting a shadow over the class, and reminded them that this exercise was not just about raw strength but also about reading opponents, anticipating their moves, and working with their partners. The strongest power is useless without a strong mind to guide it. He then pointed to the board behind him, where the matchups were displayed. Excitement erupted in the class, with some students grinning in anticipation while others felt a knot of nervousness in their stomachs. The monitor lit up, revealing the matchup: Team A heroes, Izuku Midoriya and 𝐻𝐿𝐼𝐻, Team D villains, 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 and Tenya Ida. Katsuki's grin widened upon seeing the names, and he thought about finally getting to confront Izuku. Izuku, however, ignored Katsuki's taunts and turned to 𝐻𝐼𝐻 with a casual wink, causing her to blush and look away. Katsuki's frustration grew, and he thought about what he would do to Izuku during the match. All Might quickly intervened before Katsuki could lose his temper, directing the heroes to the strategy room and the villains to the building, granting them 5 minutes of preparation time. 𝐻𝐼𝐻 and Izuku moved briskly toward the strategy room. Inside the heroes' strategy room, 𝐻𝐼𝐻 turned to Izuku and asked if he had a plan, admitting she had never used her quirk in a fight before. Izuku leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with a knowing smirk. He had already thought through various strategies for this match. He explained that Katsuki would come straight for him, unable to ignore him, while 𝐻𝐼𝐻's task would be to secure the bomb. He detailed how to bait Ida into chasing her, noting that while he was fast, he struggled with sharp turns. 𝐻𝐼𝐻's eyes lit up at the plan, but she expressed concern about feeling sick when using her quirk on large objects. Izuku encouraged her to push through it, reminding her that every test was designed to push their limits. Her hesitation transformed into determination, and she smiled brightly, thanking him and promising to try her best. Izuku stood up, ready to make their plan a reality. All Might's voice boomed over the speakers, announcing that time was up and urging the heroes to hurry into the building. As they exited the strategy room, they stepped into the dim interior of the building, where the air was still and every step echoed on the polished floor. The timer started with a beep. Izuku could hear Katsuki's heavy footfalls and Ida's precise pacing echoing through the building like distant thunder. He calmly informed 𝐻𝐼𝐻 that the bomb was on the 3rd floor, right side, and instructed her to take the staircase to avoid being noticed. 𝐻𝐼𝐻 nodded and sprinted toward the stairs, her footsteps barely making a sound. On the 3rd floor, Katsuki paced like a caged animal, his palms sparking with energy. He was eager to move and warned Ida not to leave the bomb. Ida stood tall, adjusting his glasses and declaring he would guard the device like a true supervillain. Katsuki grimaced at Ida's seriousness before sprinting down the hallway. He vaulted over the stairs, landing hard and charging forward, fueled by his determination to confront Izuku. Meanwhile, Izuku stood still in the lobby, waiting for Katsuki's approach. He could sense Katsuki's presence drawing closer, like a storm on the horizon. Suddenly, a translucent system board appeared before Izuku, detailing his mission to defeat Katsuki without sustaining significant damage. His eyes widened in surprise at the stakes of the challenge. Before he could process this new information, Katsuki stormed in, ready to engage in battle. The dim light from the overhead fixtures cast jagged shadows across his face, but his expression was clear, a wide, vicious grin dripping with malice. Katsuki charged forward with a deafening roar, kicking off the ground. His palms erupted into a violent explosion of smoke and fire, propelling him through the air like a missile. Izuku thought to himself that he needed to finish this quickly as he shifted his stance. However, seeing Katsuki flying toward him with such reckless rage made him snicker. At the last possible moment, Izuku stepped to the side, smooth and effortless, dodging Katsuki's reckless attack. Katsuki shot past him, unable to adjust, and slammed into the wall with a bone-jarring impact. The concrete cracked under the force, and debris clattered to the floor. A loose piece struck Katsuki in the head as he yanked himself free, leaving a smear of blood running down his temple and across his cheek. Izuku remarked dryly that it was a nice entrance, but Katsuki still had no aim. Katsuki, feeling the sting of humiliation, roared in fury and blasted forward again, but Izuku's reflexes were razor-sharp. He vaulted clean over Katsuki, twisting in midair before landing lightly behind him. Before 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 could even spin around, Izuku gave him a sudden shove in the back, sending him stumbling forward. His boot caught the edge of the floor panel, and he tripped, hitting the ground with a grunt. Snarling, 𝐾𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 scrambled to his feet and immediately fired an explosion at point-blank range. The blast rattled the walls, smoke rolling through the hallway like a living thing. 𝐾𝐿 smirked in satisfaction, until the haze cleared. Izuku stood there, completely unfazed, with only a charred patch across his chest and arm where the fabric had sizzled away. His expression was no longer amused. Izuku's gaze hardened as he realized the seriousness of the situation. His stance shifted, feet firmly planted, shoulders squared, like a predator ready to pounce. Years of muscle memory from hand-to-hand combat drills came flooding back. He declared that he was going to make sure 𝐾𝐿 didn't walk out of there. For the first time, 𝐾𝐿 faltered, a shiver of unease crawling up his spine, but rage quickly smothered it. He bellowed that it was time to go, raising both hands with palms sparking like live grenades. 𝐾𝐿 lunged first, palms exploding in a violent blast that echoed through the hallway. The shockwave rattled the light fixtures overhead, dust shaking loose from the ceiling. Izuku didn't move. His eyes tracked 𝐾𝐿's every twitch, every shift of muscle, like a hawk watching its prey. 𝐾𝐿's right arm swung in with a point-blank blast meant to take Izuku down, but Izuku tilted to the side at the last instant, just enough for the explosion to scorch the wall behind him without touching him. 𝐾𝐿 snarled and came in with another flurry of attacks. Left, right, spin, boom, boom, boom. Each explosion lighting up the dim hall in bursts of fire. Izuku weaved through them with casual precision, his boots barely making a sound against the floor. In a swift motion, Izuku caught 𝐾𝐿's wrist mid-swing, his grip like steel. 𝐾𝐿 tried to yank his arm free, but Izuku held him effortlessly. He coldly remarked that 𝐾𝐿 wasted too much energy before shoving him back a full 3 steps. The force of the push made 𝐾𝐿 grit his teeth, but it only fueled his rage. He came in low this time, aiming for Izuku's legs. Izuku hopped lightly over him, twisting in midair, and landed behind him again. 𝐾𝐿 spun, but Izuku was already inside his guard. A quick jab to the ribs knocked the air from him. 𝐾𝐿 staggered but forced himself forward, palms exploding in desperation. The blast flashed bright in the hallway, heat rushing against Izuku's face, forcing him to take a single step back. Smoke and sparks filled the air, the stench of burnt concrete sharp in his nose. Izuku thought that if he wanted to, he could have ended this in the first second, but 𝐾𝐿 needed to feel this. Then he moved. In one smooth step, Izuku closed the distance. His fist shot out, a powerful right hook smashed across 𝐾𝐿's jaw, snapping his head to the side. Before 𝐾𝐿 could even register it, a brutal left jab slammed into his gut, forcing the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. 𝐾𝐿's knees buckled, and Izuku didn't give him a second. His shin whipped up in a clean, merciless kick to 𝐾𝐿's thigh, striking the nerve dead on. The effect was instant. 𝐾𝐿 dropped to one knee, his leg refusing to respond, a white-hot pain shooting through his hip. He tried to stand, forcing himself through the pain, but his leg gave out again, sending him half sprawling on the floor. Izuku walked toward him slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. Each step echoed in the tense air. He coldly remarked that after all that noise, this was all 𝐾𝐿 had. 𝐾𝐿's teeth ground together, rage bubbling in his throat. He swung his arm upward, palm aimed at Izuku's face, but Izuku caught his wrist effortlessly, twisting it just enough to make him hiss in pain. Izuku declared that 𝐾𝐿 was predictable, every single move. He yanked him forward and drove his knee into 𝐾𝐿's ribs, the sound of impact sharp and deep. 𝐾𝐿 coughed, spitting saliva onto the floor. He tried to blast again, but Izuku shoved him back so hard he slid across the floor, boots squealing against the tile. 𝐾𝐿 was breathing hard now, one leg half dead, ribs aching, jaw throbbing, and Izuku hadn't even broken a sweat. The humiliation burned worse than the pain. He looked at Izuku, who stood there looking at him as if he was nothing. 𝐾𝐿's fury peaked, and his hand shot to the pin on his grenade gauntlet. The metal sound of the pin being pulled was sharp and clear in the tense air. Izuku's eyes widened slightly before his body moved on instinct. In less than a blink, he grabbed Katsuki's wrist, forcing his palm against his own chest. The explosion detonated point-blank. Fire and smoke engulfed Izuku, the blast hurling him backward like a rag doll. He crashed through the air, his boots skidding violently against the floor before he dug in and stopped. His suit was torn to shreds, half of it burned away, his chest and arm exposed, smoke curling from his skin, but he was still standing. He asked if that was all Katsuki had, his voice low and dangerous. Katsuki barely had time to react before Izuku's fist slammed into him with devastating force. The impact cracked the floor under Katsuki's boots, sending a web of fractures racing outward as he was driven down hard. The sound of stones splitting echoed through the hall. The building shook, but not a single wall crumbled. The mission condition was intact. Katsuki lay there, dazed, the fight completely knocked out of him. Izuku exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, hoping he hadn't failed. The mission complete notification chimed in his mind, and he felt a surge of triumph. Up on the third floor, Uraraka moved quickly but quietly, her footsteps soft against the cold floor. Her eyes were locked on the prize, the bomb, standing tall in the center of the room. In front of it, like an overly dramatic guard in a play, was Iida. He stood perfectly still, hands behind his back, chin up, his cape fluttering slightly from the wind through a broken window. Every now and then, he muttered under his breath, clearly rehearsing. He declared that foolish heroes stood no chance. Uraraka had to bite her lip to hold back a laugh at his serious practice of villain lines. Taking a deep breath, her expression shifted to determination. She thought grimly that if she failed this, she would starve herself for the next 2 hours. After exhaling, she nodded to herself and stepped into view. Iida's head snapped toward her instantly. He pointed dramatically and declared that the hero dared to approach, his engines revving with a metallic sound. He commanded her to stop right there. Uraraka didn't stop, she bolted straight for him. Iida roared that he would show her how powerful the dark side was, launching forward in a blur of blue exhaust flames. Her heart pounded. He was much faster than she expected. The wind from his sprint brushed her cheek as he closed in. But then she realized she had skidded to a stop at a dead end, she had missed the turn. Her mind screamed to move, and instinct took over. At the last possible second, just as Iida lunged for her, Uraraka sidestepped smoothly. Iida slammed straight into the wall, hard enough to rattle the light fixtures. The impact left a faint crack in the plaster as he stumbled back, dazed. Uraraka's hands shot forward, wrapping the capture tape around him before he could recover. She thought triumphantly that she had got him. Without wasting a second, she turned and sprinted for the bomb, her fingertips tapping it in one clean motion. Immediately, All Might's voice boomed through the building, announcing that the hero team had won. Uraraka jumped into the air, pumping her fists in pure joy. Downstairs, Izuku sat casually atop Katsuki, who was red-faced and thrashing beneath him like an angry wildcat. Katsuki roared for him to get off. Izuku glanced down, completely calm, leaning forward with a flat expression that said, "No." Katsuki's eye twitched, steam practically shooting from his ears. In the monitoring room, the screens flickered with the final moments of the match as All Might turned to address the rest of the class. He asked for their thoughts on the hero's performance. Kirishima was the first to speak, leaning forward in his chair. He remarked that Midoriya was solid, reading Bakugo like an open book, showcasing some manly patience. Mina grinned and pointed out Uraraka's calmness as she moved in without freaking out, even when Iida went full drama villain on her. Kaminari chuckled, pointing at the playback of Iida's over-the-top gestures, saying he thought he was auditioning for a movie. Yaoyorozu tapped her chin thoughtfully, noting that Midoriya's strategy was efficient, playing to both his and his partner's strengths while anticipating the enemy's moves with precision. Todoroki sat silently, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen, stating that Midoriya had held back. The others turned to him in confusion. He explained that Midoriya could have ended it immediately but chose to drag it out on purpose. A murmur spread across the room as that sank in. Jiro raised a brow, questioning if he was saying Midoriya toyed with Bakugo. Todoroki continued to watch the replay of Izuku dodging effortlessly, asserting that Midoriya didn't need more than a second to win. In the corner, Bakugo's glare from the feed, pinned under Izuku, made half the class either smirk or cringe. Mayonetta shook his head with a sly grin, saying that if someone did that to him in front of the whole class, he wouldn't want to be pinned down. 𝗧𝗟𝗓 muttered with a smirk, agreeing with Mayonetta's sentiment. All Might clapped his hands together, praising the observations and stating that there was a lot to learn, not just about raw strength, but about control, adaptability, and teamwork. The room buzzed with chatter again, half of it praising Izuku's composure while the other half teased Uraraka about her coordination with him. After 2 hours, everyone had completed their tests. All Might announced that there were no injuries, besides Ida's pride, and reassured him that it wasn't a big deal, as he wasn't actually a villain. Ida dramatically knelt like a samurai begging for atonement, claiming that adopting the mindset of a villain was an even bigger loss. The class collectively ignored him, exchanging bored looks. All Might cleared his throat, stating that they all did well considering it was their first battle exercise. He told them to go back and change, granting them the rest of the day free before rocketing away in a gust of wind, scattering papers around the room. Momo noted that they only had 2 minutes left anyway, prompting Mayonetta to muse about why All Might was in such a rush, jokingly suggesting he had some manga ordered. Shuji flatly interrupted, pointing out that not everyone was as weird as Mayonetta. After changing, the boys went out for some fun time. Izuku had even invited Katsuki and Shuto, who surprisingly agreed. The arcade they went to was alive with flashing neon lights, the chiptune music from multiple machines clashing into an oddly pleasant chaos. The scent of popcorn and fried snacks hung in the air, and the occasional sounds of air hockey filled the background. Katsuki challenged Izuku more than 10 times, racing games, shooting games, even a boxing machine, and lost every single one. Each loss made his explosions slightly bigger, while Izuku barely broke a sweat. Shuto was surprisingly calm, quietly demolishing anyone who dared face him in a strategy game. Everyone got along well for their first hangout, with earlier classroom tensions melting away under the flashing lights and laughter. Izuku eventually sat at the small bar counter inside the arcade, sipping on a cold soda as the carbonation popped pleasantly on his tongue. A small, satisfied smirk played on his lips as he leaned back in his seat, enjoying the atmosphere. That's when he noticed 3 older girls, clearly third years, walking toward him. The way they carried themselves exuded confidence. One had short dyed hair, another had a mischievous smile, and the last had a cool, almost model-like aura. Normally, Izuku would have brushed off random attention, but third years. Older, experienced, and clearly checking him out. He found himself intrigued. They stayed there for hours, the arcade's bright lights eventually dimming as the evening crowd began to thin out. Izuku leaned against a wall near the claw machines, casually scrolling his phone while the girls from earlier hovered nearby. By the time they all decided to leave, he had saved all 3 of their numbers in his phone, though he had no intention of ever calling them. But simple. They weren't even canon. And in his mind, that meant they didn't matter to his story. Eventually, everyone split off, heading back to their homes. Izuku and Katsuki ended up walking side by side in awkward silence, the sound of their sneakers scuffing against the pavement the only thing filling the air. Izuku questioned why he was putting himself through this. Why willingly walk with someone who looked like they were 2 seconds away from either picking a fight or storming off? The answer was simple: he wanted to see Mitsuki. What other reason could possibly justify walking around with a time bomb? After several minutes, they finally arrived at the Bakugo residence. The lights inside were warm and soft, spilling faintly through the curtains. As they stepped inside, the very first thing Izuku saw made his lips twitch upward. Mitsuki Bakugo was bent over in the living room, her toned back arched as she rummaged under the couch for something. Her short blonde hair framed her face, and the position left little to the imagination. Izuku didn't even try to hide where his eyes went. For some reason, Katsuki didn't announce their arrival to his mom. Maybe he didn't care, maybe he was too tired, or maybe he was just that oblivious. Either way, he stomped past without so much as a greeting, ignoring the fact that Izuku was clearly looking. Mitsuki pulled a small battery out from under the couch with a victorious hum, then stood upright. She turned around, only for her eyes to land on Izuku standing there next to her son. A faint blush crossed her cheeks before she quickly masked it with a glare. Without a word, she marched over to Katsuki, grabbed him by the ear, and dragged him into the other room. She hissed in a low but furious tone, questioning why he hadn't mentioned bringing a friend. Katsuki shot back, dismissing her concern, which only made her twist his ear harder. He yelped, wincing in pain. Satisfied, she let go, smoothing her hair and taking a slow breath before walking back to the living room. Mitsuki greeted Izuku with surprise, stepping forward to give him a warm, friendly hug. Izuku replied with a smirk, acknowledging her surprise. She casually asked how long he planned on staying, but there was a subtle, playful edge in her tone. He responded smoothly, saying he would stay as long as Katsuki could handle it. She chuckled, teasing that he wouldn't be there long. Katsuki, still muttering under his breath, stomped upstairs with his ear glowing red. The slam of his bedroom door echoed through the house. The moment it shut, Izuku's entire demeanor shifted. The polite guest mask vanished, replaced by something far more direct and confident. In 2 steps, he closed the distance and pinned her against the wall, his palm flat beside her head. He remarked on her teasing nature, tilting her chin up so their eyes locked. Her smirk widened, unflinching as she explained how she got Masaru to do whatever she wanted. Izuku chuckled lowly, intrigued. She maintained eye contact, her smirk as sharp as ever. He leaned in slightly, his breath brushing against her ear, suggesting that he wondered if she could handle it when someone played back. Her eyebrow arched and she playfully challenged him. He murmured that it wasn't a challenge, just a preview. Without warning, his hand slid lower from her chin, down the curve of her side, until his fingers teasingly grazed the edge of her shirt. Her breath hitched just enough for him to notice. She boldly stated that she could scream right now, to which he confidently replied that she wouldn't. She smiled, questioning why not. He leaned in closer, whispering that she was enjoying this too much. She chuckled, not denying it, and warned him to be careful, hinting at the consequences of poking the tiger. Izuku thought to himself that she probably got that quote from a social media post, but he played along, suggesting he might be counting on it. He slowly pulled his hand away, leaving only the lingering heat between them. For a moment, they stared at each other, tension thick enough to cut with a knife, before Mitsuki smirked again and stepped past him as if nothing had happened. Izuku, however, didn't move. Instead, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her back, spinning her toward the couch. Her eyes widened in surprise, but before she could say a word, he pushed her down onto the cushions. The movement was quick and controlled, sending a clear message. In one smooth motion, Izuku stepped forward and braced his hands on either side of her, leaning in so their faces were inches apart. He asked if she liked playing games, his tone calm but edged with authority. Her smirk returned, though softer now, her breathing just a little heavier. She asked why, and he tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting. He scanned her face slowly, noticing the faint shift in her expression that indicated she was slightly thrown off. Izuku's gaze dipped briefly before returning to hers, suggesting they see how long she would last. Mitsuki opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden creak from upstairs caught both their attention, Katsuki's door opening. Her eyes flickered with alarm for just a split second, and Izuku leaned in closer, whispering that she was out of time. Katsuki's footsteps started down the hall. With a light tap on his chest, half warning, half surrender, Mitsuki signaled him to move. Izuku straightened up, stepping back with a slow smirk, claiming his win. Mitsuki's heart raced, the rush of adrenaline mixing with something she hadn't felt in years. She kept her breathing steady, hiding it behind her sharp, confident expression. Katsuki's footsteps grew louder until he appeared at the bottom of the stairs, passing right between them and heading for the kitchen without so much as a glance, muttering about being hungry. The moment his back was turned, Mitsuki shot Izuku a sharp glare that lasted only a second before the faintest curl of a smile crept onto her lips. That smile wasn't sweet, it was dangerous. She leaned in just enough for only him to hear, suggesting they go to her room for an even better game. Izuku's smirk deepened. "Are you willing to risk it?" His tone was low, smooth, and filled with confidence. Her grin widened, eyes glinting with challenge. She was eager to see him falter. Izuku chuckled under his breath, tilting his head as if weighing the offer, though they both knew he'd already made his decision. "Well then." His voice dipped an octave lower. "Lead the way." Without another word, Mitsuki turned on her heel, glancing back once to ensure he was following. Izuku did, his smirk never leaving his face. Mitsuki called out toward the kitchen as they walked down the hallway, announcing that Katsuki had left. No response came, just the faint sound of music through headphones and the clack of a knife on a cutting board. Katsuki smirked to himself, focusing on his sandwich and tuning out the world. He felt a quiet determination burning within him, resolving to get stronger and train in martial arts. Upstairs, the atmosphere felt different, quieter, heavier. Izuku followed Mitsuki to the end of the hall until she stopped in front of a door and pushed it open. Inside was her and Masaru's bedroom, neat, warm, and ordinary at first glance. But Izuku's keen eyes picked out little details immediately. The bedspread was slightly rumpled, the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, and there, on the bed, was the exact spot he recognized from their teasing video call. The same soft lighting, the same sheets. The memory made his pulse quicken despite himself. While Izuku took it all in, Mitsuki's mind raced. A twinge of guilt surfaced, a whisper of conscience reminding her that this was her son's childhood friend, and that once they crossed this line, there would be no turning back. But guilt was a small, fragile thing compared to the rush she felt now. Above all else, Mitsuki wanted to see him break. She wanted to see Izuku, strong, stubborn Izuku, squirm under her influence, his composure shattering. That thought alone sent a shiver of excitement through her. Most people didn't know the truth about her, that behind her blunt attitude and sharp tongue, Mitsuki thrived on drawing reactions out of people, pushing them until pleasure and pain blurred into something intoxicating. Poor Masaru hadn't stood a chance. He had learned to take her roughness, even grow to enjoy it, but it had taken years. Now, standing in front of someone younger, stronger, and filled with nervous tension, she could hardly wait to see how Izuku would react when that confidence cracked. Izuku remained unaware of the small, dangerous smile curling at Mitsuki's lips. He knew nothing about her true nature. All he knew was that he wanted to take the plunge. He felt a surge of confidence as he declared it was time to begin. In a bold move, he playfully slapped her shoulder, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Mitsuki's eyes widened, surprise coursed through her, and she felt an unexpected rush. Trying to mask her reaction, she scoffed and spun around, playfully pushing him back against the wall. "I never felt this way with Masaru." It seemed that Izuku was not convinced, as he turned toward the window and stated that he would only be contacted when she was serious about their relationship. Mitsuki started to respond, but her words were interrupted when he suddenly turned back, took hold of her, and pressed his lips against hers. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, she was frozen in shock. However, instinct soon took over, and she found herself leaning into the kiss. His hands moved to her, he cut in, smirking. Her face flushed hot as she hastily straightened her clothes, denying his implication. Without another word, he got up, crossed to the window, and stepped onto the sill. With a grin, he said goodbye to Mitsuki before dropping down and vanishing from sight. She sat there in stunned silence, the breeze from the open window slipping between her legs and cooling her, making her shiver. Turning onto her side, she stared at the empty space where he had been. The familiar motions should have been enough, but every time her body climbed toward release, her mind flashed back to his hand. The way his fingers knew exactly where to press, the deliberate pace, the smug grin on his face when he stopped. The memory haunted her. She wanted that same burn, that same maddening push toward the edge, but her own hand felt dull and mechanical. Minutes passed, her breathing grew heavier, but the rush, the spark, wasn't there. Frustration bubbled inside her as she forced herself to go harder, only to suddenly stop, disappointment washing over her like cold water. She dropped her toy beside her and lay back, sprawled out on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thighs glistened, her chest rose and fell, but her expression was pure irritation. The room was silent, save for her shallow breaths. She realized bitterly that he was in her head now. Outside, the last rays of sunlight faded into night. Mitsuki didn't move. She just lay there, legs still spread, the air cooling the dampness between her thighs, her body aching for a release she couldn't give herself anymore. Izuku arrived back home, his steps lighter than usual, an almost invisible smirk on his face. The faint, lingering rush from earlier still pulsed through his veins, like a warmth he didn't want to fade. He closed the door behind him, letting the quiet of the house wrap around him. It had been a while since he'd felt that kind of thrill, a mix of control, risk, and victory all bundled together. He couldn't help but think ahead, imagining how his flowers would bloom in the coming days, especially Mitsuki. He planned to leave her exactly as she was now for 3 days, no more, no less. 3 was too short to forget, but just long enough for frustration to ferment into something even more intoxicating. Stripping down, he stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash over him. Steam filled the bathroom as he leaned against the wall, running a hand through his hair, replaying today's events. Everything had gone almost exactly how he wanted. Every reaction, every little push forward, had been deliberate. The only thing left now was to sleep, he thought, feeling the fatigue of the day catch up to him. After drying off, he went into his room and dropped onto his bed, sinking into the mattress. But just as his eyes began to close, his phone buzzed. And then buzzed again. And again. Groaning, he reached over to his desk and picked it up, unlocking it to see a flood of messages. Every girl in his class had texted him. And, somehow, so had all the guys, including Aoyama. He wondered what Aoyama could possibly want as he scrolled through the endless messages. Momo's were neatly typed and polite, 50 of them, each spaced out by minutes. Mina's were a rapid-fire mess of emojis and random questions, 69 messages exactly. Tsuyu had sent a staggering 190, most of them short one-liners like, "Hey. What's up? You there?" over and over. Then there was Achiko, this time another 900 messages, each one a different link to how to make money videos with a simple, repeated question, "Is this real?" Izuku sighed deeply, tossing the phone onto his bed. He thought about how he hated being liked by the whole class and decided to text the girls back later, giving them late replies. He smirked, thinking that girls liked it when you acted like the prize. Of course, before you could play the prize, you had to make sure they were still chasing it. And Izuku was very good at that game. He suddenly remembered he had an appointment with MT Lady. On top of the Channel 6 radio building, MT Lady stood with her hands on her hips, scanning the skyline. The wind tugged at her hair as the minutes ticked by. She had been early as always. But now, she had been waiting. No sign of the hoodie hero. This was the very first time someone had ever stood her up, she thought, irritation bubbling in her chest. But then, oddly enough, it faded into a smile. She thought to herself that she liked a guy who made her chase. The next day came without fanfare. Izuku went to school like normal, no extra spring in his step, no rush to get there early. Hero training was on the schedule, but he wasn't expecting anything particularly thrilling, not after yesterday's battle exercise. In class, he leaned back in his chair, his phone buzzing non-stop in his pocket until he finally fished it out. 50 texts from Momo. 69 from Mina. 190 from Tsuyu for reasons beyond comprehension. And, once again, hundreds more from Achiko, this time bombarding him with videos about investing in side hustles and how to triple your income in 1 week, each one followed by the same question, "Is this real?" This was his life now, he thought flatly. Shaking his head, he asked himself the real question. Who was he going on a date with today? After a moment's thought, he picked Mina. She replied instantly, suggesting the arcade. That made him smirk, simple, chaotic, and low pressure. He could work with that. But before he could pocket his phone, another message popped up from her. Izuku stared at the screen for a second, his smirk widening despite himself. He thought about how strange the girls were, already knowing the answer. After school the final bell rang, and students poured out of U.S. gates. Izuku was among the first, hands in his pockets, glancing around until he spotted a shock of pink hair bouncing toward him. Mina waved wildly, ready to get absolutely destroyed at the arcade. Izuku smirked, challenging her by asking if she thought she could beat him. She confidently claimed to be the queen of games, insisting that by the time they left, he would be calling her Your Highness. He replied that they would see about that as they walked toward the train station. At the arcade's glass doors slid open, revealing a neon-lit paradise. The sound of clattering buttons, cheering kids, and thumping music filled the air. Rows of machines flashed in all colors: racing games, rhythm machines, claw games, and more. Mina's eyes sparkled as she suggested starting with a racing game. Izuku followed her to a pair of bright red racing pods. As they slid in, she elbowed him lightly, encouraging him not to hold back just because it was their first game. He accepted the challenge. The countdown began. They both shot off down the virtual track. Mina drifted through corners like a pro, laughing every time she pulled ahead. But Izuku was on another level. His reflexes were razor-sharp, eyes darting between the road and the minimap. Mina sputtered in disbelief as he overtook her on a hairpin turn, and he coolly replied that it was instinct. By the end, his car drifted smoothly across the finish line several seconds before hers. Mina leaned back, pretending to be in pain, declaring that it was pure luck and demanding a rematch. Izuku smirked, insisting on moving to the next game instead. They moved to a light gun zombie shooter, and Mina grinned as she picked up her plastic shotgun. Now you're in my territory. The game started, with zombies rushing at them from all angles. Mina went wild, blasting anything that moved, laughing loudly every time she landed a headshot. Izuku, however, remained unnervingly calm, his aim steady, never missing, conserving ammo. Halfway through, Mina's character was swarmed. She called out for Izuku to cover her. Without hesitation, he cleared her screen with a series of perfect shots. When the game ended, their scores popped up. Izuku's was almost double hers. Mina stared at the screen, her jaw dropped. She declared that he was a menace. He teased her, saying she was just bad. Dance Machine Challenge. Mina dragged him toward a dance pad, grinning from ear to ear. She proclaimed that there was no way he could beat her here, as she had rhythm for days. Izuku shrugged, stepping up beside her, claiming he had good footwork. The song started, fast, upbeat, full of flashing arrows. Mina excelled, her hips swaying with the beat, landing step after step. She shot him a confident smirk mid-song but then noticed he was keeping perfect score without even looking down. She questioned how he was doing it. Izuku simply replied that he had good reflexes. When the final score appeared, Mina's jaw dropped again. He had beaten her by a tiny margin. She accused him of cheating somehow, though she didn't know how. He teased her again, suggesting she might not be as good as she thought. She narrowed her eyes but couldn't help laughing, declaring that it was on now. Claw Machine Chaos. Next, Mina spotted a claw machine filled with plushies. She pointed at a pink octopus plush and asked Izuku to win it for her. He studied the machine, slid in his coin, and won it on the first try. Mina admitted she wasn't expecting that, taking the plush and hugging it. She remarked that he was good for something other than making her lose. He replied that he was glad to be of service. Air hockey. They ended the night at the air hockey table. Mina leaned forward, eyes locked on him, declaring that the winner would get bragging rights forever. Izuku replied that forever was a long time. The game began, and Mina went all in, being aggressive and slamming the puck toward him with speed and force. Izuku countered each shot with perfect precision. Halfway through, Mina scored and threw her hands up in victory. But then, Izuku scored 5 points in a row. When the match ended, Mina slumped against the table, laughing breathlessly, saying she officially hated him, but in a fun way. Izuku smirked, taking that as a compliment. They left the arcade with Mina holding her pink octopus plush and pouting just enough to be cute. She declared that next time, she would pick games he couldn't win at. Izuku replied that she would have a hard time finding one. She gave him a sideways glance and added that he was lucky he was kind of attractive, or she would be much more upset about this. Izuku chuckled, hands in his pockets, and offered to walk her home. As they left the arcade, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the streets in warm gold and orange. Izuku carried the small plushie he had won from the claw machine earlier. Mina had insisted it was her prize, but he was still holding onto it for now. He teased her about still being upset that he didn't let her cheat with her quirk back there. Mina dramatically pouted, placing her hands on her hips, claiming the claw machine was rigged. She added that even if she did use her quirk, she would probably just melt the toy or the whole machine. Izuku smirked, suggesting it sounded like a skill issue. She laughed, but her tone softened a bit as she explained that it was actually harder than it looked. Her acid was strong, but she couldn't always control how corrosive it was. Too much and she would ruin things. Too little and it was useless. She had been training to adjust it better, but she trailed off, kicking at a loose pebble on the sidewalk. Izuku tilted his head, genuinely interested, and asked if it was like having a dial stuck on random settings. Mina grinned and confirmed that sometimes it was perfect, while other times, she had melted more than a few pairs of shoes during practice. Izuku chuckled, noting that was why she didn't wear the same shoes twice in training. Mina agreed, adding that maybe one day she would get it perfect. She looked at him playfully and joked that if he ever saw her fighting a villain barefoot, he would know why. He smirked, promising to bring spare shoes if they were ever on patrol together. They continued walking, their conversation bouncing easily between teasing and genuine curiosity. Mina nudged his arm playfully as they turned onto her street. When they stopped at her doorstep, Mina looked up at him, still grinning. Izuku reached out, holding the plushie out to her, declaring that the prize was hers. The streetlight above cast a warm glow over them. She hugged it close, smiling warmly, thanking him for walking her home and noting he was too sweet for his own good. He replied that he couldn't let his partner in crime wander home alone after he had wiped the floor with her in Dance Revolution. She rolled her eyes, laughing that it was a lucky round and that next time, she would totally win. Izuku leaned against the fence casually, saying they would see. He added that he thought he could handle her acid. Mina blinked, her cheeks flushing as she stammered, questioning if he meant her quirk. He nodded, a smile curling at the corner of his mouth, confirming he meant her acid, quirks, and everything. He added that he wasn't exactly easy to burn. Her blush deepened, and she playfully punched his shoulder, warning him to be careful with what he said, or she might actually believe him. Izuku shrugged with an easy grin, insisting he was just telling the truth. For a moment, she looked at him, as if searching for the right words. Then, without warning, she stepped closer, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and whispered goodnight before dashing toward her door, slipping inside with a wave. Izuku stood there for a second, his hand brushing the spot where she had kissed him, a small smirk creeping across his face. He thought to himself that he was making progress. He turned and began walking home. On his way, he remembered something. He muttered under his breath that he was supposed to meet 𝐴𝐻𝐿ady yesterday. He gave a small shrug, hands in his pockets, thinking that if she was really interested, she would chase. The evening breeze followed him all the way back until he stepped inside his house. The first thing he saw was 𝐻𝐿𝐴, down in their home gym, focused on her workout. She suddenly caught sight of his silhouette behind her, causing her to jump in surprise. "Oh, you scared me," she exclaimed, standing upright and placing a hand over her chest. "What are you practicing now, how to shock someone?" She breathed lightly from her workout. He casually walked a few steps closer and remarked that if he would have nailed it on the first try. Her lips formed a playful pout at his jab. Without missing a beat, she flicked her wrist, making a half-full water bottle glide through the air toward him with her quirk. Izuku caught it easily, examining it before noting that her quirk had gotten stronger as he stepped closer to her. She smirked and slyly asked if he had been with a girl. Izuku returned her smirk and admitted that he had, curious about how she knew. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 stepped forward, closing the distance until she was just inches from him. Her eyes softened as she leaned in, whispering that it was mother's intuition. She then asked if the girl was cute, reminding him that he could tell her anything. Izuku scratched the back of his neck, feeling awkward as he acknowledged that it was just weird and embarrassing to share. 𝐻𝐿𝐴's teasing smile widened as she gently took his hand, assuring him that he didn't need to hide anything from her. She brought his hand upward, stopping when his palm brushed against her side. The contact was brief but left him startled, prompting him to snatch his hand back almost immediately. He awkwardly suggested he needed to go get changed and would see her at dinner. Without another glance, he turned and headed for the stairs at a brisk pace. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 stood there for a moment, watching him go. The smirk she had worn earlier faded into a more thoughtful expression. She realized she had crossed a line and needed to be more careful. As she made her way upstairs, she passed by his room and heard the faint hiss of running water from his shower. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a heartbeat as she imagined opening it, just to catch a glimpse of him. But she pulled her hand back, reminding herself that he was her son. Without another glance at the door, she turned away and went to her own room, locking it behind her. Izuku muttered to himself, feeling overwhelmed as the water streamed over his head and shoulders, heat soaking into his muscles. Images of his mother drifted into his mind, the warm smile she had when he was a kid, the late nights she stayed up just to hear the door open, and the way she hugged him a little too long whenever he came home safe. But those wholesome memories were now tinged with something else. Through the years, 𝐻𝐿𝐴 had blossomed into someone more captivating. Her confidence radiated, and she possessed an effortless beauty that could make anyone stop in their tracks. His jaw tightened as innocent thoughts began to shift, and he felt a rush of conflicting emotions flood in. Mother in his memories blurred with the 𝐻𝐿𝐴 from fan art he'd once seen back on Earth, every exaggerated image suddenly finding a new home in his mind. His pulse raced as he leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees while the water cascaded down his back. The real him would laugh if he knew he almost let a woman like 𝐻𝐿𝐴 slip away without making his intentions clear. He had always disliked how others paired her with All Might. It never made sense to him. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. The decision forming in his head was not impulsive, it was deliberate and dangerous. Steam thickened around him as he tilted his head back, letting the water run over his face. Droplets slid down the sharp lines of his body, tracing over the abs and muscles he had worked hard to perfect. When he finally stepped out, he wiped a hand across the fogged mirror. The man looking back was not the awkward, stammering Izuku Midoriya. His hair clung to his forehead, his jaw looked sharper in the low light, and his physique resembled that of a Greek god. Hero's frame wrapped in strength. He knew exactly who he would become now, and the smirk widened on his face. The water still dripped from his shoulders when the shift happened. He walked out of the shower and began drying himself with a towel. Suddenly, he heard a muffled sound from 𝐻𝐿𝐴's room. He turned in that direction, thinking about how he always hurt her. She would be heartbroken if she knew. He had ignored it for too long. It must have been hard for her. It wouldn't be fair if he pursued her friend and not her. With that thought, Izuku decided to leave. As he got dressed, he put on some headphones and began playing games on his PC. In 𝐻𝐿𝐴's room, the soft hum of the bedside lamp filled the quiet space. 𝐻𝐿𝐴 lay back against her pillows, one hand resting over her chest while the other slid slowly down her stomach. She let her eyes flutter shut, picturing the man she was supposed to be thinking of, her husband, smiling at her the way he used to when they were younger. However, the image began to shift, blurring until it transformed entirely. It was no longer her husband's face, it was Izuku. The realization struck her like a jolt, her own son's name echoing in her mind, but instead of stopping, her thoughts raced, filled with warmth and confusion. In her chest spreading down between her thighs. Her breathing quickened as she surrendered to the moment, allowing his image to fill her thoughts. Izuku stood over her, a confident smirk on his lips, his eyes locked onto her as if she belonged to him alone. She envisioned the way his hand would rest on her thigh, the weight of him pressing her into the mattress, and the sound of his voice when he spoke to her. Exactly what he wanted. A shiver ran up her spine. Her fingers slipped beneath the thin fabric, feeling the warmth of her own skin as she moved in slow, steady motions that made her hips roll in response. The more she imagined him, his heat, his strength, his closeness, the tighter her stomach coiled. She pictured his breath against her ear, his hand gently holding hers above her head, and the way he would say her name as if it carried a deeper meaning. Izuku felt a wave of warmth wash over him as he lay back against the pillows, his heart racing. He took a moment to collect himself, the atmosphere in the room feeling charged with unspoken emotions. As he stared at the ceiling, thoughts of someone special lingered in his mind. At dinner, the clinking of cutlery was the only sound filling the air. Neither Izuku nor 𝐴𝐻𝐿 spoke initially, the silence thick with unexpressed feelings. Izuku focused on his food, chewing slowly, while 𝐴𝐻𝐿's gaze shifted between him and her plate. Tonight felt different, a shift in their usual dynamic. Finally, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 broke the silence, asking about his day at school. Izuku replied simply, his eyes still on his meal. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 pressed for more details, curious about his day. With a faint smirk, he finally met her gaze and playfully suggested that he had fought villains in training and had girls eager to talk to him. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 was taken aback by his newfound confidence but smiled, realizing there was more to his day than he let on. After a brief silence, Izuku casually set down his chopsticks and asked if she had plans for the following day. When 𝐴𝐻𝐿 inquired why, he suggested they spend some quality time together, just the two of them. 𝐴𝐻𝐿's expression softened, and she playfully questioned if he was trying to win her over for something. Izuku admitted that he thought she deserved it and mentioned a place he knew she would enjoy. After a moment of pretending to consider, she agreed. Curiosity piqued, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 asked about a girl he had met that day. Izuku casually mentioned Mina and then decided to share stories about his classmates, detailing their quirks and funny moments. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 listened intently, laughing softly at his anecdotes. When he described Mina's vibrant personality, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 raised an eyebrow but chose to remain silent, sipping her drink with a knowing smile. As they continued to talk, the earlier awkwardness faded, replaced by a comfortable rhythm. After dinner, they moved to the couch, scrolling through movie options until Izuku randomly selected one. The title card appeared, revealing a story about a mother-son relationship. They exchanged a glance but chose not to comment. Initially, the movie served as background noise as they engaged in light conversation about various topics, including funny incidents at 𝐴𝐻𝐿 and memories from Izuku's childhood. However, everything changed during the ending scene, where the mother and son on screen found themselves in an unexpected and NTMT situation. Both Izuku and 𝐴𝐻𝐿 froze, their expressions shifting to shock. 𝐴𝐻𝐿's cheeks flushed, and Izuku's jaw tightened as they avoided eye contact. When the credits rolled, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 quickly stood up, brushing off her skirt and softly announcing her intention to head to bed. She walked away without another word, leaving Izuku on the couch, trying to clear his mind by switching to a football match. He sank back into the cushions, his thoughts still replaying the unexpected scene from the movie. A shout echoed from below, breaking his focus. Recognizing the voice, he decided to check on 𝗚𝗚𝗚. He flicked off the TV and lights, pulled on his hoodie, and stepped onto the balcony before launching himself into the night sky. The cool wind rushed past him as he soared across the city skyline, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of his flight. When he landed on the roof of the Channel 6 radio station, he spotted 𝗚𝗚𝗚 sitting on the ledge, casually scrolling through her phone. For a moment, he considered surprising her but quickly dismissed the idea, knowing it could end badly. He called out to her casually, causing her to jump in surprise. A smile spread across her face, but instead of greeting him warmly, she stepped forward and playfully punched him in the gut. Izuku didn't flinch, but she winced, shaking her hand in disbelief. Their banter continued, with 𝗚𝗚𝗚 expressing her frustration about him not showing up for their planned meeting. Izuku acknowledged her feelings but pointed out that he hadn't agreed to meet in the first place. Their playful argument continued, filled with sarcasm and light-hearted jabs. Eventually, they decided to drop the topic, and Izuku asked what she was up to. 𝗚𝗚𝗚 admitted she was bored and on patrol without a partner, noting how peaceful the area was. No crimes, no action, just him babysitting empty streets. It was quiet, and as he scanned the view beneath them, something caught his eye. Down in a narrow alley, a homeless man stood with another figure, partially shrouded in shadow. He noticed the scene and decided to investigate. Before she could ask another question, he hooked an arm under her knees and another around her back, lifting her in a smooth princess carry. She blinked up at him, startled, and for a moment, her breath caught, thinking how manly he seemed. Then, without warning, they shot into the sky. The sudden burst of speed made her yelp, clutching his hoodie as the air whipped past them. Midair, he halted sharply, hovering in the night. His eyes locked on the scene below. The homeless man had just been handed a small wad of bills, but as soon as the exchange ended, the other man palmed a small, metallic chip and slapped it onto the side of the homeless man's neck. At first, the man didn't notice, but within seconds his hands flew to his throat, body jerking. Thick veins bulged along his neck and temples, twitching unnaturally. His eyes narrowed. The chip pulsed faintly, releasing something into the man's bloodstream. The man's pupils widened before turning an unnatural, deep crimson. The handler's voice was faint from this height, but he could hear it clearly. "Now, go wreak havoc." At that moment, the homeless man bent his knees and sprang into the air with incredible strength. As he rose, his feet began to shift, bone and flesh warping until the bottoms looked like the heavy base of a plate compactor. He crashed down on the asphalt, the road spiderwebbing beneath him, chunks of pavement launching into the air from the sheer force. The shockwave rattled the nearest streetlights. He spoke firmly, saying she should go after the guy in the alley while he dealt with this one. She nodded quickly, and he released her from his arms. She immediately shot up to her giant form in a single, fluid motion, the ground trembling beneath her massive weight, before shrinking back down mid-step as she darted into the alley to cut off the other man. He dropped from the sky, boots hitting the cracked pavement just a few meters from the transformed homeless man. He thought about the strange quirks people had, wondering how some of them felt like cruel jokes. The man's head snapped toward him. Without hesitation, he crouched and launched himself again, descending like a human wrecking ball. But before he could hit the ground, he was there, one arm shooting up like a piston, his hand clamping around the man's throat midair. The impact never came. The man's legs kicked helplessly, and in seconds, his eyes rolled back, body going limp as he slipped into unconsciousness. When he let go, the man crumpled onto the cracked street. That's when he spotted it. The chip stuck to the side of the man's neck. It popped loose, clattering to the ground. Beneath it was a strange, faintly scorched mark. His eyes darkened. It was the same mark he had seen on another man before. This was just like the vigilante thing, but now it involved chips. That was concerning. A shadow passed over him as she returned from the alley, her expression grim. She said the other man had gotten away, having melted into the crowd before she could pin him down. He straightened, hands in his pockets, and said they would have to patrol every night from now on until they caught this guy. Her heart skipped a beat at the thought of spending every night with him. They cuffed the unconscious man for the authorities, made their reports, and then rose back into the sky, heading for the roof of Channel 6 radio station once more. Sitting on the ledge, he laid out his theory. She said she had heard something like this before, but back then, it was small time, nothing major. He replied that it could be the same group or new players, but from the looks of it, the things they were making took time. That meant they weren't ready for a big move yet, so they had a window before the next strike. They just had to be ready. She said she was available every night starting now, and added that she should probably get his number first. He smirked slightly and shook his head, saying she couldn't figure out who he was just yet. Instead, he suggested she follow his Instagram account. She frowned as she typed it in, saying her fanbase would ask why she was following an account with 0 followers. He casually suggested she tell them it was her aunt's or something. As he stepped toward the roof's edge, he said he should bounce and then launched himself into the air, disappearing into the night. She remained there, staring after him with a mix of irritation and amusement before letting out a sigh. As long as she made some progress, she thought, a small smile tugging at her lips. Izuku went home that night and crashed face-first into bed. Tomorrow, he planned on starting his real push to crack this case wide open. The next morning, Izuku stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. Then it hit him, the new power he had unlocked yesterday, heat vision. He sat on the edge of his bed and took a slow breath. He focused, feeling a strange pressure build behind his eyes. The warmth grew quickly into a sharp heat, and as he exhaled, twin beams of sizzling red light burst out, instantly vaporizing the plastic cup on his desk. A small puff of melted plastic smoke curled upward. He smirked, satisfied, and murmured that he liked it. He had kind of wanted X-ray vision, but this would do. Standing, he headed to the bathroom and let the hot water wash over him. Day 2. He thought, deciding to keep ignoring Katsuki. As for who to talk to today, developing a HRM wasn't as easy as it sounded. He would just go with the flow. By the time he stepped out, hair damp and a fresh towel around his waist, his mind was already jumping between strategies for school and patrol. That's when the door to his room suddenly cracked open. 𝐀𝐮𝐭𝐡𝐨𝐫 stood there, mid-step, and froze. So did he. Her eyes dropped, and he noticed her surprise. She blinked, stunned for a heartbeat too long, before snapping back to reality and quickly pulling the door shut. On the other side, her cheeks flared hot. She scolded herself, thinking she should start knocking from now on. But no matter how much she tried to scold herself, her mind replayed the image over and over, every detail sharper than the last. Steam practically puffed from her head as she hurried to her own room. She thought to herself that she needed to get it together, pressing her hands to her burning cheeks. Back in his room, Izuku finished dressing, shaking his head with a small, knowing smirk. He realized that a seed had been planted, whether he meant to or not. He grabbed his bag, opened his window, and stepped out into the cool morning breeze, deciding to fly to school that day. With a burst of energy, he shot into the sky, the morning air whipping past his face as he soared toward you. In a streak of speed, the clouds blurring overhead. Moments later, he landed softly behind an alley near the school gates, straightening his uniform jacket as he stepped out casually, blending into the flow of students. That's when he spotted Tsuyu hopping lightly along the sidewalk toward campus. He raised a hand in greeting, and she blinked at him, tilting her head slightly. She greeted him back, noting that he was there early and asking if he had taken the train. Izuku smirked, responding that it was something like that. Tsuyu's eyes lingered on him for a moment, and she pointed out that he had bed hair. He chuckled, running a hand through it and joking that the wind had gotten to him. Tsuyu raised an eyebrow, teasing him about whether he had walked through a storm. Izuku shrugged, dodging the question and saying it had just been a fast morning. He then glanced at her bag, asking if she was heading in now. She confirmed that they had heroics later and expressed curiosity about what All Might had planned. Izuku shared her sentiment, mentioning that yesterday's training had been fun but that today might be even more interesting. Tsuyu gave a light bit of agreement, narrowing her eyes slightly as she suggested he seemed to know something the rest of them didn't. With a sly smile, he walked beside her toward the gate. As they walked, Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of impatience. He thought about how nothing significant would happen today, with the rescue training arc just a week away. He dragged his feet through the hallway, stepping into 1A's classroom and greeting a few classmates before heading toward his seat. However, before he could sit down, Momo was already there, standing in front of his desk with her arms folded, holding her phone out. On the screen was a photo of him and Mina at the arcade yesterday. Momo calmly asked him to explain the picture, her posture indicating she expected an answer. Izuku teased her, suggesting she might be jealous, which caused her to flush and deny it. She clarified that she was only going to ask when they would organize their study session. Izuku casually suggested they hang out at the library after school to check out the material they were supposed to study and set up a group session with anyone interested. Momo agreed, still lingering at his desk before sliding into the chair beside him. She then asked why he and Mina had gone out yesterday and why Mina had told every girl in class. Izuku froze, surprised by the revelation. He shrugged, suggesting that Mina might have wanted to make them jealous. Momo blinked, stating that they wouldn't be jealous since they didn't like him that way, though she admitted she liked him as a friend. Izuku stared at her, pretending to understand her explanation. Momo's blush deepened, and she quickly stood up, retreating to her seat as class began to gather. Izuku leaned back in his chair, feeling a stare directed at him. He turned his head just in time to catch Tsuyu looking straight at him. When their eyes met, he gave her a deliberate wink, causing her to jerk her gaze away, almost making him chuckle. He thought to himself that he knew what he would be doing later and that he had a date with his mom. Class had just started, and Izuku could already feel the tension in the air, not from the boys but from the way several girls shot him quick, sharp glances before pretending to look elsewhere. He thought to himself that this was exactly why he had disliked high school, Not because he wasn't attractive, but because high school girls could be really emotional and annoying. The hours dragged on slowly, and when the bell finally rang for break, Izuku stretched and decided he needed something sweet to survive the rest of the day. In the hall, he spotted Jiro heading his way, her hands in her pockets, earphone jacks swaying with each step. He casually asked where she was headed, and she replied that she needed some water and invited him to go with her. They walked side by side toward the vending area, where Izuku selected a chocolate bar while Jiro filled a paper cup at the tap. After a quick sip, she glanced at him and asked if he felt like walking around. He shrugged and agreed. They wandered through the quieter parts of the school, their footsteps echoing faintly in the mostly empty halls. The conversation started light, covering music, classes, and bits of gossip about other students. However, Jiro's expression shifted, and she hesitated before asking if he and Mina were a thing. Izuku replied without missing a beat that they weren't. Jiro nodded, looking ahead, and clarified that she was just asking in case she knew someone who might be interested in him. Curious, Izuku asked why she would be interested in him. Jiro raised an eyebrow and noted that almost every girl in the school knew who he was, mentioning rumors about him having a fan club. Izuku smirked, intrigued, and asked how she would know that. Her cheeks turned faintly pink as she denied being a co-owner or anything. He chuckled, raising an eyebrow at her oddly specific denial, and she scoffed, shoving her hands deeper into her pockets. "Shut up." Izuku kept smiling, his chocolate bar half-eaten in his hand. Without thinking too much about it, he held it out to Jiro. She blinked, clearly surprised, and he assured her he was fine. Her fingers brushed against his as she took it, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. She wondered if this counted as an indirect kiss and if it meant he liked her. Slowly, she brought it to her mouth and took a small bite, closing her eyes for a moment as if savoring more than just the taste. Izuku watched her with a raised brow, feeling a bit awkward but letting it slide. He mentioned needing to go to the restroom and walked off. By the time he returned, the break had passed in quiet normalcy. Classes resumed, the hours slipping by until the final bell rang. When school ended, Momo was already waiting near the door. Without a word, the two fell into step together, heading toward the school library on the second floor. Inside, the scent of paper and faint polish filled the air. Sunlight streamed in from tall windows, dust motes floating lazily through the beams. The space was almost deserted, with just a couple of students scattered in distant corners. They claimed a table near the back. Momo took a seat and remarked that it wasn't half bad in there, likening it to her kitchen. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek tablet, unlocking it with a swipe. She explained that this was all the material for the first term and expressed pride in having already learned it. Izuku smiled at her and complimented her on her achievement. Her blush came instantly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Momo suggested they simplify everything so everyone could understand. Izuku leaned back in his chair and countered that it would be too easy for them, noting they had 2 months before exams, which was plenty of time to get everyone up to speed the right way. Momo pondered his suggestion and asked where they would study. He shrugged and mentioned either the library or her house, noting that the library was pretty empty. They agreed to start writing everything down and set to work, their voices low as they went over each subject, avoiding the hero course material. Momo suggested splitting the subjects evenly to prepare summaries for everyone, ensuring nobody fell behind. Izuku leaned in to look at the screen and teased her about making studying seem fun. Momo shot him a flat look, and he clarified that it wasn't a bad thing at all. Her cheeks turned faintly pink, but she maintained her composure. He added that he enjoyed working with her because she made even boring tasks feel less tedious. Momo clicked her tongue softly, and Izuku grinned, noting that if she kept talking like that, they would be there all night. He joked that he better start talking more, which earned him an exasperated look that didn't quite hide her amusement. They continued working, the quiet rhythm of typing and scribbling occasionally broken by his sarcastic remarks and her dry comebacks. Each time their hands brushed while passing a pen or paper, they didn't comment but also didn't pull away too quickly. By the time they finished, the stack of organized notes was impressive, as was the unspoken tension between them. The table was littered with neat stacks of papers, printed summaries, and Momo's perfectly labeled folders. Izuku stretched his arms over his head with a yawn, noting that it had been more productive than he expected. Momo gathered the last of the notes, slipping them into her bag, and pointed out that studying wasn't so bad when done properly. He grinned, suggesting it might not be bad when done with the right person. She gave him a sideways look and asked if he spoke like this to every girl he worked with. He replied that he only spoke like that to the ones who made him forget they were working. Momo's lips curled into a faint smile, but she didn't respond as they made their way outside. The late afternoon sun cast warm light across the courtyard, and the faint hum of traffic could be heard in the distance. At the front gates, a sleek black sedan was parked. Momo's family driver stepped out and,